Section 16 of Travels to Oaxaca by Nicolas-Joseph Thiéry de Menonville, an anonymous translation from the French. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. By accident, a mirror happened to hang before me, and seeing myself in it, dirty and with my clothes torn, I could not but feel amazement and high gratification at the little difficulty I had hitherto met with. In France, taken for a highwayman, I should have been stopped by the police. In Mexico, I was not even asked for my passport. I scarcely knew to what I had to ascribe this distinction. Possibly, in a small degree, it is to be attributed to the inertia and negligence of the Spanish people. But at the same time, much liberality and nobleness of mind are apparent in their custom of not suffering themselves to be influenced towards, nor their confidence diminished in, a man and a traveller because of the garb he wears. Their conduct, moreover, may be owing, and principally perhaps, to the officers of the interior, relying on the governors of the frontier cities and towns for care that no one be admitted into the kingdom but Spaniards or individuals furnished with regular passports. However this may be, the alcalde mayor behaved to me with the same politeness as if I had been dressed in the nicest manner. He even played me a little trick which no doubt afforded him considerable amusement, and which made me laugh at myself. He sent me to the farmer of the tobacco duty, whom he represented to me as being ill, and at the same time a Frenchman, two motives for my rendering him whatever assistance my art was capable of. In vain did I decline going, on pretense that not pertaining to the College of Physicians in New Spain, the consequences of such a procedure on my part might injure me. He insisted, and proffered to take all responsibility on himself. But what was my astonishment, on complying with the wish of the governor, at finding my dear countryman plump as a partridge, and with a complexion ruddy as the morn. I was not able, however, to draw from him a single word of French, and when I explained to him the nature of my visit, he answered me coolly in Spanish that the alcalde might keep his physic and physicians to himself. As for his part, he was in want neither of the one nor the other. I was much pleased with having to render an account to the governor of the success of my mission. He received me with less kindness than on the former occasion, but this was merely to hide the trick, he laughing all the while in his sleeve. He thought me his dupe, this. However, I frankly forgave, on reflecting how much more so he was mine. I afterwards went to his secretary to beg him to change me some gold, and this I perceived had a good effect, for in this, as in my dear country, gold is closely cherished, and gives such confidence to those who are its masters. Soon as it was known I had gold, I was well enough dressed, and the secretary received me in a manner no less courteous than the alcalde. I found him a man of sense, and who distinguished the value of study after the French manner. He inquired how many academies we had, and when I informed him that, besides 5 or 6 in the capital, we had more than 20 in the provinces, he was wrapped in astonishment, and mute with wonder. "Happy country!" he exclaimed. "Thrice happy country!" He was in the right. In what other country do the arts, does science flourish in the same degree? Where else is truth and knowledge of every description so fully placed within the reach of all? What resources does Paris furnish as well to the inquisitive who merely skim the surface as to the studious who seek for perfect acquaintance with truth? Public and private libraries, academies, societies of amateurs in which literature is cultivated, models, masterpieces of every kind, these are all found in the capital of France, and found but there alone. Does one wish to eliminate the value of these? Let us cast our eyes over the neighboring nations. These, though competitors, are obliged to yield us the palm, and however disposed to give their due to them on the score of their individual merits, a Frenchman, placed in any of them, sighs for his darling home. From the secretary I went to the alguacil, who was to furnish me with horses, and not choosing to leave the spot until I had seen them, I sent word to the director, who had invited me to dine with him, not to wait. I had a trifle served up for me, which I swallowed with good appetite, but of which I should have partaken with more zest in any other situation. The reason this: the alguacil chanced to be the jailer of the royal prison, so that I actually took my meal between two wickets, surrounded by guards, in a place whose only decorations were bundles of keys, locks, and chains, a place where I heard incessant moans and lamentations, and where all the time I stayed I was witness to the tears of a multitude of poor Indians who had flocked hither to comfort a father or a friend. As soon as the horses arrived, I made all haste to the customs house to load my effects. The director reproached me, yet kindly, for not dining with him, and repeated his urgent entreaties that I should call on his sick friend. He is, added he, on your road, at 4 leagues from here, and his name, Don Joaquim Amoral de Castilla. Great God! Exclaimed I. What, turn out of my way for the sake of a man who treated me with such indignity? Heaven forbid! Upon this I recounted the humiliating refusal of this gentleman to see me, and the rest of my adventure in his house. I, however, added that, out of respect individually to the director himself, I would yet consent to prescribe for his complaint at Tehuacan, and wait for him there, provided the director would send for him. But as for ever setting foot again on his threshold, it was that to which I never would consent. The director was confounded and mortified, and made me 100 excuses for the sick man, concluding with abandoning his cause altogether and persisting from further persuasion. Thus I had my turn, and without being actually a physician myself, physic was revenged for the slight it had received in my person. At length I departed, escorted by the guards belonging to the tobacco farm, as far as the suburbs, either to do me honor, or, which is most likely, to be sure I took the road to Vera Cruz. I now was happy as if I had escaped from the galleys and breathed with freedom. But I also made such use of my liberty that I was soon at a distance, spite of the extreme heat of the day, reaching Chapulco by 4 in the afternoon. The great heat and extreme thirst induced me again to drink of the water of the river Tehuacan, and my draught was followed by the same effect which I had experienced before. I enjoyed this day a sight perfectly new to me, and exceedingly singular. It was a mountain of snow situate within the torrid zone. Orizaba, on my passing at this time, was perfectly free from clouds, and I had an unmolested view of its mighty mass, though from a distance of 10 leagues. Its form, seen from this spot, is that of a sugar loaf, and appears but a quarter of a league from Chapulco. It is inconceivable, notwithstanding the extreme warmth of the atmosphere where I was, what pleasure I received from the sight of this frozen mountain. It seemed even to cool and revive me. My very mouth, as is said, watered at seeing it, and I felt almost persuaded I could have swallowed the whole if it were but within my grasp. I presented myself immediately before the alcalde, whose house, according to custom, fronted the prison. He caused his people to go in search of horses for me, and as none were readily to be found, he was on the point of ordering men for transport of my luggage. 8 Indians, each laden with about 200 weight, would have been equal to the task, and have carried it for the same price paid for beasts of burden. The idea appeared to me shocking. I entreated the alcalde therefore to have patience. I would in fact rather have halted a week than be witness to so sad, so humiliating a spectacle in my esteem for any human being. At length asses were obtained for carrying my boxes, and for myself a horse. I paid as customary beforehand, and ordered all to be in readiness to set off next morning by 3. After these precautions I took a walk in the village, where I enjoyed a coolness as pleasant as if in Europe. I entered the grounds of a worthy Indian. The garden was full of pear trees, and from these I gathered and ate about a dozen pears, smaller than, and not equally good with the rousselet. In another garden I saw a species of cherries called capuline, the stones of which I preserved. In a third I was shown silkworms, and the good folks were astonished to find that these insects were known to me. After my walk I returned to my inn, where I supped off a meagre fowl, and opened all my trunks to give air to the cochineals. I laid down to rest, but on what do you imagine? 100 times shall the reader guess, and yet be wide of the truth. It was on the old gate of a prison. These gates are made in the same manner as the gratings to the hold of a ship, and such a gate or grating was the only bedstead the Casa Real could boast. I might here be said with reason to be fluttering about the flame, and was full of causeless apprehension lest I should burn my wings. The thought reminded me of the verse of Marini, Corre la vega farfalla al chiaro lume. Still, after chasing from their usurped territory the gloomy thoughts which haunted my brain, and committing myself to Providence, I sunk into a slumber, and, bad as my bed, enjoyed refreshing rest. I was awakened at the hour I appointed in the morning by the severity of the cold. I determined on walking for a time to keep myself warm, but as daylight appeared I bestrode my Rocinante to rest my legs. Oh, what a number of rare and curious plants did I again behold! Sed omnes electrimabiles urgenter longa nocte. Horace. At the summit of the mountain I met with the 3 litters of a Spaniard of some rank. The 2 first were occupied by women and children, the third by himself alone. Notwithstanding the extreme acclivity of the mountain, he had ascended it in this manner from the side whence he came. This morning the mountain Orizaba, being again enveloped in clouds, was not visible. I arrived at Acultzingo at noon, and left it an hour afterwards, but at a slow rate. I was solicitous of not reaching Orizaba before night, not only that I might escape search, but to avoid being consulted on their maladies by the guards. However, what is predestined must have its course. I reached the town as I intended at night. The guard-house on the right was shut up, and I hoped to pass without any mischance. But there was another on the left which I had not remarked. My horse was stopped by the bridle, a new alarm, though now not so lively as that I had experienced at Tehuacan. I had become better accustomed to such events. I halted, and began with my customary peroration. Gentlemen, I am a botanist. I have nothing but herbs, nothing which is contraband. I was now interrupted by the chief of the guard, who clasped me in his arms and exclaimed, "Ah, Señor! And it is indeed you! You have long been gone. Where do you come from? Angel sure from heaven! You it was who snatched from the hands of death the chief of the other guard-house. For God's sake, deign to visit my poor wife. It will readily be conjectured from this accost that my boxes would need no searching, but in turn I must necessarily visit the sick person. She was a young woman, reduced by that dreadful disorder which has been said to derive its origin from America, to the very last extremity. This I did not conceal from her husband and parents, at the same time declaring what the malady was, for it is so common in this country that the mention of it never gives offence. I ordered some palliatives, and promised to return. After reasoning in a manner which enchanted all who were present, I was led back to my horse, passing no doubt for a most extraordinary personage. My vanity was not excited by this, for grief alone had possession of my faculties, as I reflected on the dreadful effects of this formidable malady. The next day I thought only of my departure, but being detained, owing to the negligence of the alguacil, I had occasion to pass by a shop where I saw some very handsome Asiatic tiger skins. I purchased 4 for housing for horses, which I meant to send to my father, and 2 small skins of tiger cats, fit for making muffs for women, which I intended for my sister. But being injured by mites, I was obliged to sell both the one and the other, and was thus deprived of the pleasure of presenting to my dear parents these intended tributes of my gratitude and affection. I sold them at the rate of a piastre apiece at Port-au-Prince, and one with another they cost me 4 reals. From Orizaba I proceeded to Villa de Cordova, which I reached by noon, after having had my trunks examined at the gate, but in a careless manner. I made a very indifferent dinner in a very indifferent inn, but I saw there a singular painting. It represented a Spanish youth at dinner at that inn, and behind him a young negro, who, with a loaded pistol, was amusing himself in shooting at a painting of Christ suspended from the wall. But wonderful to behold, from the wound so great a quantity of blood issued as to fill a large tub. The whole of this happened in this very inn, at least if reliance could be placed on the observations of my hostess, who affirmed it with the most solemn oaths. I did not take the trouble to contradict her, but coolly inquired what she had done with such a large quantity of blood. This she could not answer. I left her for the purpose of hiring horses, and was able to obtain them upon no other condition than the promise of a piastre to the alguacil of the district. It was then so late that I could not arrive at San Severo before the close of day. At this place I alighted at the grocer's where I had lodged before on coming. My first care was to urge him to procure horses for me, as, owing to the darkness of the night, I could have no chance myself of success, especially considering the numerous windings of the pueblo, the houses of which are, as it were, buried in thickets. I promised mine host, if he would procure me them, a couple of dollars, but the idle scoundrel would not budge an inch, though to earn before he retired to rest more money perhaps than he had gained in the whole preceding week. Nothing could exceed the ignorance, the folly, and the pride of this fellow and his brothers. They laughed out like idiots at seeing me bring back nothing but plants, and at the fancy that for matters of such little value I should have daily exposed myself to the risk of perishing from hunger and fatigue. I was in consequence obliged to go myself to the alcalde, groping my way through the bushes. The alcalde was a negro, whom I found in a sick state. I entreated his wife to interest herself in my behalf, and gave her 6 reals, with promise of an additional remuneration in case of success. But whether owing to pride or idleness, when after some hours I returned, the alcalde informed me there were no horses to be had, I was in a violent rage, and suspected strongly that the idle fellow had not even given himself the trouble to inquire. In order to convince myself, therefore, I desired the woman to return me the 6 reals I had given her, and which without any hesitation she complied. This conduct I regarded as showing much good faith and delicacy. Good faith, inasmuch as it would not have been difficult for her to have maintained that she had really endeavored to get horses, and delicacy, seeing she might think she had no right to keep a sum of money which had been given her for the purpose she had not effected. At length I was obliged to return to my lame negro. This relates to some antecedent passage in the narrative which is lost. He consented readily to take me to La Punta, but I wished to go as far as Calabaza. He swore he would take me no further than La Punta, and for my part I swore to myself, in silence, that if I could not find horses at that place, I would make him go on to Calabaza. We did not depart till daybreak. The whole road in the gorge we travelled from Orizaba to this place is marked by a cut 150 fathoms broad, anciently intersected by small forts, redoubts, and other strong buildings, the vestiges of which in masonry are still to be seen. This is one entrance into Mexico, which formerly was more frequented than is now the road which leads from Vera Cruz to Jalapa. At the square where, near these ancient redoubts, the guard-houses for tobacco are constructed, I was again visited 3 times in the course of the morning, and was unmercifully obliged to open all my cases. But I have no cause of complaint, for to this rigorous conduct it is that I was indebted for the preservation of the major part of my cochineals. On this occasion it was that I perceived a species of moth, which, having made itself a kind of nest in their cottony down, committed a dreadful ravage among my insects. I was shocked at the loss I had sustained, and halted to cleanse my nopals from these murderers, an operation which cost me upwards of an hour. While thus occupied, one of the officers of the guard, who recognized the cochineal, advanced in a familiar manner, observing I must certainly be fond of travelling, since I could choose to go so far to obtain what might be had at Vera Cruz. I observed to him that the species was not the same, and that this alone was the only one proper to use in unguents for the gout. On his part he insisted on the contrary, and affirmed that with this matter he was much better acquainted than me. I on my part was obstinate, and maintained my opinion as long as I thought necessary to encourage his misconception as to my real objects, and at last I gave up to him, promising to follow his advice. There was no doubt abundant field for laughter in the folly and impudence of this ignorant chap, but I had special reason for keeping my countenance, and merely stored on the occasion this observation, that ignorance, silly pride, and self-conceit are constant companions. I arrived at La Punta about 10 o'clock. The Spaniards and Indians, all in their holiday clothes, were flocking hither from every part of the country. It happened to be the festival of the Holy Sacrament, the most solemn of all in Spain. They were about to begin the procession in the square, planted with plumeria, a species of jasmine, with flowers of yellow, red, white, nay, of almost all shades of colours. I repaired thither, and found there had been a gallery of verdure constructed by means of the leaves of plantains, through which the procession advanced. I made one in it, and afterwards went to breakfast with my former hostess. At her house I found an Indian alcalde, whom I recognized by his black staff, the distinguishing mark of his office. I begged of him to obtain horses for me, but notwithstanding the most diligent search, there were none to be had. "Why," said he, "do not the same horses take you forward to Calabaza? Why did not the alcalde of San Severo give such orders to the negro who brought you hither?" I had no time to answer. A score of Indian voices remarked, "Oh, es su nación." Their insinuation was that the alcalde himself being a Negro, favored those of his own country. After this I was enabled to obtain a hearing. I represented that though I had offered 6 reals to the alcalde of San Severo as an inducement for him to procure horses for me as far as Calabasa, neither my money nor my entreaties were of any avail. At these words my Indian knits his brow, sends for the topeth, and commands him to carry me forward to Calabasa. The people applaud the determination, delighted at seeing a Negro punished. The black, however, does not so soon acknowledge defeat. He asserts that the alcalde has no jurisdiction over any but the inhabitants of his own district, and that for his part, belonging to another, he was by no means under his control. The countenance of the alcalde at this afforded an admirable sight. His looks denoted passion, and could his eyes have darted lightning, they would have struck the Negro to the earth. "Come with me, Señor," said he, taking me by the hand. "We shall let this scoundrel see, this picaro, whether or no my orders go for aught, while he is in my jurisdiction." He then led me to the house of the lieutenant of the alcalde mayor, whither he ordered the Negro to follow, and was accompanied by all the crowd. While the alcalde was making his report, I drew the rector aside, and after making him my friend, by proposing to him to give me change for some gold, of which he appeared to me very covetous, I entreated him to interest himself in the matter. This he promised me, and drawing the lieutenant on one side, he pointed out to him with much energy that the ordinances of the King of Spain are precise in directing officers to render assistance and service to all travelers, and that there are no injunctions which ought to be more rigidly enforced. This remonstrance had the desired effect. The lieutenant inquired how many horses I wanted, whither I was going, and what I offered. I saw the bent of these very judicious questions, and that my answer would shortly occasion a decision. I therefore stated that I wanted 5 horses for Calabasa, 7 leagues distant, and that I was willing to pay 9 piastres. My offer appeared so handsome that it excited a general burst of admiration. The audience raised their hands to heaven, looked at each other, and finished by murmuring at the obstinacy of the Negro, who still made objection to going further. The alcalde, however, threatened to cast him into prison, and cause me to be forwarded by another topeth. He at length agreed, and withdrew, pursued by the hootings and hisses of the Indians. This, however, was not all. The lieutenant caused him to be brought back, and requested me in his presence, if any injury or ill conduct was shown towards me on the road, to advise him of it immediately. The recommendation was applauded, and drew forth fresh hootings of the insolent topeth. This scene convinced me of the truth of what I had read in the work of the Abbé Raynal respecting the jealousy and animosity subsisting between the Indians and Negroes in this country. End of section 16. Section 17 of Travels to Oaxaca by Nicolas-Joseph Thiéry de Menonville, an anonymous translation from the French. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. I departed from La Punta at 2 in the afternoon, and had to travel 7 tedious leagues by a very bad road. The unfortunate Negro, desirous of shortening the way, lengthened our journey still 1 league more, for after reaching a ford in a river which empties itself into the Rio de la Punta, he found it impassable, and we were consequently obliged to return. Above the junction of the 2 rivers, I again noticed the frightful passage over the wretched bridge, and the tremendous fosse in the rock through which this deep and rapid river glides, foaming in many a curve. After crossing this bridge, we proceeded at full gallop over the savannas of the plain on which we entered. I had some words with the negro, but as I assumed a commanding tone, he was soon calm, and in spite of all the torrent beds, arroyos, we reached Monte Calabaza by 8 in the evening. I lost a milled quadruple from my purse on this stage. It had no doubt gotten out of my purse into the waistcoat pocket, and thence through some opening had fallen on the plain of sand we had now entered upon. I regretted it, as it was lost to everybody. Alas, said I to myself, were it not far better I had given it to the beautiful Indian of Orizaba, or rather to the kind and worthy family I had seen at Atcolcingo. At the village of Calabaza I again beheld my old fox of a host, much astonished at seeing me, whom he had observed going on foot, return on horseback, and with such a train. I asked for horses, which at first he told me it was impossible to procure, that there were none, that none were at hand. He used many other contradictory and frivolous excuses for not supplying me. The end of all this, I saw plainly, was only extortion, and at length I obtained what I wanted, though for 6 horses to Vera Cruz, a distance of 18 leagues, he exacted no less than $20. The horses indeed were excellent. Before I left the place, I cast a glance about me. The whole landscape was changed in the interval of a fortnight. The rains that had fallen, in lieu of barrenness and perfect nudity, had occasioned the display of the most charming and lively verdure. The whole green carpet before me, and every shrub, were enamelled with flowers, while innumerable birds gave, by their pleasing notes, a charming animation to nature. I here purchased a nest of 6 beautiful green parakeets, with blue wings, no larger than sparrows. I brought them in safety to Vera Cruz in a calabash suspended from my saddle, but they perished at sea. We travelled the first stage at a brisk rate, and reached the miserable rancho of the old and ugly negress at which I had halted on leaving Vera Cruz. Fatigued, harassed, and half dying with hunger, I entreated of her 4 eggs that I saw, but she would spare me only 2. She had brandy, but no wine, so that I made myself a kind of lemonade. This was all I could get for my sorry dinner. As an additional vexation, I was subjected to 1,000 ridiculous questions from this talkative and impertinent woman, and to raillery such as were admissible only from an equal. I was nearly out of patience with her, but rightly reckoned that contempt was the only return due from me to such a creature. I took much pains in course of my long excursion in examining the character of the Africans and Americans, and marked distinctions highly favorable to the latter, notwithstanding their nearly similar condition in life under the dominion of Spain. The African constantly appeared to me to be proud, passionate, vindictive, and effeminate, base, and intolerably idle. The Mexican, on the contrary, is phlegmatic, mild, and submissive, faithful, and laborious. His humility is in no respect allied to meanness. The Negro is humble from fear alone, the Indian from reflection, and oftentimes from attachment, for he is truly as partial to Spaniards as abhorrent of Negroes. With the former he frequently intermarries, but never with the latter. The Negroes are spies over the conduct of the Indians, and in their charges are almost always calumniators, either with a wish of flattering their masters or from jealousy of their fellow servants, similar to those dogs which guard the weak and timid flock. They avenge themselves for the sufferings they endure from their master on those subject to their vengeance, and frequently tear them to pieces. The Americans have that natural benignity of soul which makes them prepossessing in their manners and hospitable to everyone. I met on my way with 1,000 Indians. Their salute was made when yet at a distance, their gratulation always uttered unaffectedly, and at the very instant of our meeting, and how thankful ought I not to be for the constantly kind reception I experienced from them. For the negroes, scarcely would they deign to bow on my passing, and at the last place that I halted at, and elsewhere, how did I prove their want of compliance to travellers? The first, in following their employments, stray 10 and even 15 leagues from their hamlets, and carry enormous loads. But never did I meet with a single negro on foot, or carrying the lightest burden. The dream of certain authors that the liberty of America will be the institution of a negro is purely chimerical. Liberty is indeed a blessing, by whatever hand bestowed, but that an African, a voluntary slave, a man of the most depraved nature, the scoff even of his equals, and thrown like the foam of the sea on the shores of America, that such a vile, wicked, and cowardly people should appreciate justly the value of liberty, and so far lose their known illiberality as to share its benefits with their masters, is what cannot be expected. No, should a revolution happen, I can far more readily believe it will proceed from a people, mild indeed, but endowed with sense, a people who still occupy the soil on which their ancestors lived free, who still hold this tradition, and whose temper, soured at last by the indignities to which they are subject, may break their yoke in pieces and disdain their forced subjection. The Negro by no means possesses that energy of mind, nor that love for his country, which are the origin of great enterprises. His heart, essentially corrupt and dastardized by interest and debauchery, is incapable of sublime feeling, as his soul of grand conceptions. True bravery exists only in the worthy soul, and who can boast a more noble soul, one consequently susceptible of real courage, than the inhabitant of America, so little yet removed from the pristine state of nature? Let then the Indian unfold the banners of freedom. This prospect most delights me. This is my view of futurity. After these reflections, suggested to me by circumstances, I reverted to those which more immediately affected myself. I had ample room for congratulating myself at having reached the last day of a journey so interesting, and at seeing it thus crowned with the most complete success, despite of 2 viceroys, 6 governors, 30 alcaldes, and 1,200 customs guards. Still, in the midst of my self-congratulation, 2 gnawing worms interrupted the perfectness of my happiness, and constantly tormented me. In the first place, I was not yet clear of the perquisitions of the governor of Vera Cruz, and I dreaded his reproaches. If he should come to the knowledge that, in spite of his orders, I had exceeded the limits of the jurisdiction of the city he governed, I was precisely in the condition of the truant who sneaks into his father's house after a holiday he has been making, while his parents thought him at school. On the other hand, whatever reliance I placed on Spanish dilatoriness, I trembled lest I should not arrive before the departure of the 2 ships destined for the Havana in the forward part of June, and by which I reckoned upon returning. That I might so do had been the motive for my hastening my departure from Oaxaca and making such speed on my way, and on this head I had verily no occasion to reproach myself, for I had used the utmost diligence. By 4 in the evening we arrived at Rio de Jamapa. Though this river was greatly swollen, we were assured it was passable. The Indian, my guide, went before. In a little time the water was up to our saddle bows. Most luckily I had constantly had my boxes packed very high, but for which all my treasures had been lost. For us ourselves, the risk we ran was imminent. This was no longer the broad and tranquil stream, but 3 feet deep, which I had passed before in a boat, but a rapid river whose impetuous current bore everything before it, and which was more than 600 yards over, besides the oblique line which its rapidity forced us to take. We were moreover obliged to make an angle in order to ford it and reach the proper place of landing. I found all my exertion requisite in keeping myself steady on my horse, which trembled with dread beneath me, and all my courage not to be intimidated at the sight of our danger. I found it utterly impossible to look at the current without being dizzy, so much so, indeed, as almost to lose my seat. Our horses, feeling their way at every step, were 20 minutes in relieving us from the frightful fears we endured throughout this dangerous passage. It was certainly the most perilous situation I ever was placed in my life, and were a million offered, I would not have ventured to return to the other side. On landing I was pale and faint, and needed a draught of brandy to bring me to myself. 300 paces from where we landed, we saw a cabin at which we should have made the shore, but for the depth and extreme rapidity of the flood. Night overtook us at 2 leagues from Vera Cruz. It was unfortunate for us not to be able to reach that city, but to attempt it would be running the risk of losing ourselves in a country where the tracks made in the sand one day are effaced by the winds on the next. Moreover, our horses were exceedingly tired, and after all we should have found the gates of the city shut. We were therefore forced to stop, and halted for the night at the side of a caravan consisting of 300 mules. I had before met with similar caravans, and at first conceived, as may be gathered from my narrative, a very high opinion of the population and commerce of the country. But I have since, on weighing these circumstances more maturely, been convinced of the contrary, and that, compared with the consumption and commerce of the whole of Mexico, the number of mules is far from great. During my stay at Vera Cruz, I saw more than 10,000 mules loaded there, but then it must be considered that the exportation and import of a country 4 times as large, though not a 20th part so populous as France, is all carried on at this one port, that these animals convey the produce of the whole of the north of Mexico, Vera Cruz, Oaxaca, and Guatemala, a gorge between the mountains of more than 500 leagues in length, and that the returns brought by them are either of great bulk or very heavy, for example, wine, oil, iron, etc. Nor is this all. Though the common load of the Mexican mules is from 500 to 600 weight, it is not the less true that 30 or even 40 of them, on account of the necessity of relays for shifting the loads, scarcely carry as much as one of our broad-wheel wagons, such as are used between Nantes and Strasbourg, and which carry 12,000 weight. After this computation, 6 of such wagons in reality effect as much as 200 mules, though they make a far less conspicuous appearance. To these considerations let there be added that these numerous caravans are only seen every other year, when the galleons are off the coast, and then we shall be enabled to appreciate at their just value this pompous and imposing display of mules and muleteers. We hope to meet with some supply of food from these muleteers, for we were utterly destitute of provision, having reckoned for certain on reaching Vera Cruz. I therefore entreated them to sell me some of their thin cakes of maize, but this they flatly refused. However, a few moments after, they brought me a dish of beans, and some maize prepared in a manner I had never seen before. They take the finest part of the flour of this grain, after sifting it, which is formed into a puff paste, and they afterwards bake it in the same manner as biscuit. They thus make chippings of white bread, which are eaten in pieces, and are really both very good and wholesome, but require long mastication, as they are very dry and hard. The present of the muleteers I shared with my topeth. I opened all my cases in the same manner I had done the day before, to give air to my cochineals. After this I was anxious for rest, but in vain did the cool of night combine with fatigue to close my eyelids. A cloud of gnats, hovering constantly about, prevented the gentle influence of the poppies of Morpheus. How vexatious, how tormentingly vexatious the struggle between exhausted nature and the continual buzz of myriads of winged adders, now alarmed with their hum, and as often with a sting, the pain of which, of long duration and severe, ceases only to be succeeded by a terrible itching, which nothing alleviates, and which is only the more increased by scratching, till, bathed in blood, scratches indeed are often followed by dangerous ulcers. Ever summoned, and still ever driven away, my disturbed slumbers were to me a real torture, and at the close of night I found myself still more weary than if I had passed a whole week in the most exhausting labor. At length I saw on the horizon the brilliant star of the ship Argos, and concluding thence it was 2 o'clock, we departed. We arrived at Vera Cruz at the gate of Orizaba before daybreak. I was in a condition so little fit to be seen that I thought it best to go and change my dress before I entered the city. Leaving therefore the Indian to take care of my trunks, I scaled the walls, entered my lodgings, where I found everything as I had left it, dressed myself in a decent manner, and repaired to the gate of Orizaba, which was then opening. I was a little surprised and somewhat terrified at not finding there my horses, but I learnt that, there being no officers at that gate, they had been taken to that of Mexico. I ran through the town thither, and reached it at the instant of their making their approach. The guards wished to send me to the customs house, which did not open before 8 o'clock. I instantly felt all the inconvenience consequent on traversing the city and exposing my prize to the looks of everyone, and shuddered at the thought. I therefore saw no better expedient of disembarrassing myself than tickling the natural vanity of the Spaniards. "What," said I to the chief clerk, "do you then so soon forget the French physician? And is it possible you would wish to make him kick his heels in attendance like a footman for the space of 4 hours? Besides, are you such novices? Cannot you yourselves make the requisite examination? You cannot be such geese but know your business, and how to act without advice. Do but look, what I bring is nothing but herbs, nothing but botanical collections." And as I spoke I opened my boxes. They were not disposed to take the trouble of examining more than 2, and the only things to which my good folks took exception were the sticks which supported my nopals. They fancied these must be some precious wood, and inquired its name of me. I found it no difficult matter to invent one, and I obtained my dismission. "Vaya usted con Dios," "Pass in God's name," was all they said. I did not require twice bidding, but soon reached my own home. There was nobody yet up in the house. not a soul stirring in the street, and everything was placed secure in my apartment without a single person observing me. I had now attained my wishes, and my satisfaction was extreme. My expedition was complete, and in the short space of 20 days, the half of one of which had been uselessly spent, I had also stopped 2 days at Oaxaca, so that I had traveled in 16 days. I had journeyed 240 leagues, of which 40 on foot, over roads so bad as often to be almost impassable, under a burning sun, in a wretched country, without resources, and among people of whose language I was ignorant, in a country, in short, where I was destitute of a protector or any connections, and where every public officer from his station ought to be inimical to me. To have effected under such circumstances so long and tiresome a journey without illness and without accident was a matter so extraordinary, so lucky, that I scarcely was able to persuade myself of its reality. In order to secure my felicity and more fully enjoy my thoughts, I resolved on shutting myself up and not going out the whole of the day. After breakfast I sent out for some mould in which to plant my nopals, which I had taken out of the cases and exposed to the air. I found they had sustained some trivial injury from rubbing, but this was inconsequential, and all considered I had no room to complain. I put the nopals into my bedroom, the most retired of my apartments. As for the vanilla and other plants, they were ostentatiously exposed in the hall, in order to attract the attention of those individuals from whom I must necessarily receive visits. However great my satisfaction, and when is it ever perfect, I could not disguise from myself the reverse of the picture. My return by sea to Saint-Domingue was adventurous, but my chief embarrassment was how to get my treasure on board at Vera Cruz in conspectu omnium, in the face of all Israel, and then the second gauntlet I had to run at the Havana, where I presumed I should have to touch, for to how many accidents and inconveniences must I not be subject, if in the crowd of inquisitive spectators I must encounter there should happen to be but one of them malevolent. I was, moreover, anxiously disquieted about the means of fixing my plants on board ship in such a manner that they might be least liable to harm. However, after forming one general plan, I afterwards made a point to dismiss the care of particulars till time should require their adoption. Following this rule, the first thing which claimed attention was my passage. Before my departure, I had been presented to the Marquis of Harrison, then 2 months at Vera Cruz, who had arrived with a cargo of wines, and who, on going to the Havana, was anxious to have a Frenchman for his companion. He had accepted of me, and we had agreed to treat for my passage in 3 weeks from the time of our conversation. I arrived in good time, therefore, and proposed visiting him that very evening, for the purpose of learning what day he meant to sail. At dusk, therefore, I went out, calling first on my friends the engineers, who I knew would not be at home, in order to gather from the servants how the land laid. These good folks were delighted to see me, and by their attentions I reasonably judged that no change had taken place in their masters with respect to me. They informed me that I was still conjectured to be at La Medellina, employed in botanizing and enjoying the baths. I next visited the general of the fleet, under like certainty of not meeting with him. My surprise on this occasion was of the most pleasing kind, when I was informed by his major domo that Don Antonio Ulloa was at Mexico. This incident was the more favorable, owing to the constant visits I received from this inquisitive gentleman, who would have examined everything, and infallibly have discovered what I wished to conceal. I have had confirmation of my being supposed at La Medellina. It was indeed known that I had brought back cases with me full of plants, but if nothing further was suspected, of what concern to me was this. End of section 17. Section 18 of Travels to Oaxaca by Nicolas-Joseph Thiéry de Menonville, an anonymous translation from the French. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. I returned home to supper, therefore, perfectly tranquilized. I had here my mattresses, pillow, and white sheets, which I found the more delightful from having long been ill-accustomed to a good lodging and comfortable repose. There is, in truth, nothing like privations to teach one the real value of comfort. The next morning, after a refreshing night's rest, I rose and was dressing myself to call on Mr. Harrison when Mr. Ferson entered. "So, my little libertine," said he to me, "you have not been all this time at Medellina, of that I may safely wager. Confess now," said he, smiling, "that I am not wrong in my conjectures." I wished first to learn if the governor had mentioned me, and was informed that, in answer to interrogations twice made at his table, he had been told that I was still at Medellina. Upon hearing this, I made him partially acquainted with my journey, telling him that in my excursions I had been insensibly attracted by my curiosity as far as the volcano of Orizaba. He was all astonishment at my having been able to go so far in the time, and solicited a detail of my expedition. I found it no difficult matter to vamp up a story with little embellishments, and suited to the spots I had seen, but of which I placed the scene between Vera Cruz and Orizaba. I afterwards showed him, with an air of triumph, all my plants. "Why, what the deuce will you do with all this?" said he, jeeringly. I let him enjoy his laugh, but I had my turn, for he, having entered my bedroom, saw my nopals there, and no more for knowing nothing of the cochineal insect, he paid them no attention. I therefore laughed in my sleeve. "Confess, however," added he, "that you have had the sight of a most beautiful country." "Yes," retorted I, "and also a most wretched one." With this he agreed, and on noticing with astonishment the scarcity of cultivation and inhabitants I had remarked, he enhanced my wonder exceedingly by informing me that from Panama on the southwest to California and Sonora on the northwest, and from Cartagena to the Mississippi, embracing a surface of 2 millions of square leagues, the enumeration of the inhabitants does not exceed 1 million, including not only all the Spaniards, but likewise Indians, mixed breeds, and Negroes. Monsieur de Ferson likewise informed me that Monsieur de Harrison would not sail for a month to come when he left me, inviting me to dine with him. I promised him I would, but in the interval I wished to find out a carpenter to order different cases for my plants, and concert with him on the best mode of constructing them with security to bear the rolling of the ship. Having planned all this, I ordered 16 boxes of 20 inches long, 10 broad, and 6 deep, for each of which I was to give him 2 reals. I likewise wanted 2 large chests to hold them, but for these he asked me 95 livres of the money of our islands for each. The grossness of the sum displeased me, and I thought no further on the matter, till in crossing the market I saw in a carrier's shop 2 large trunks, which served him for locking up his goods at night. These I purchased for $8 apiece, and I found them larger than those I had intended, made of good ash plank, well bound with iron, and with good locks. One essential matter thus complete, I began to think of my departure. I went to my cook's, and learnt there with inexpressible delight that D was about to sail that very week for Guarico, thus the Spaniards denominate Cape Francois. All that was wanting now was to agree with the captain, but this was what gave me some uneasiness, on account of the possibility of some inadvertency he might entertain against me upon the following occasion. At the Hotel of Mexico I had been a near neighbor of his, and he had oftentimes intruded upon me at those moments which were the only ones I could dedicate to study. But what even more than this had made me averse from him was his common practice of speaking on religion and politics, of declaiming against the fanaticism of his countrymen, and extolling to the skies Voltaire and other authors who have the most freely written on these subjects. This at the first only made me look on him as an eccentric character, but it afterwards originated a suspicion of his being a spy, who only meant to pump my sentiments. On this I cut him quite short, by observing that it by no means suited his station to meddle with affairs which naturally pertain to the civil and ecclesiastical powers, to whose imperative decisions and superior intelligence it were better he should submit. I was fearful lest when I needed him he might retain resentment at my hastiness. I was at the time unacquainted with the circumstance of his being on intimate terms with the lady of the late intendant, and that she had inspired him with that goodwill towards me which I had so constantly experienced in herself. Of the good effect of this I had soon the most ample proof. On my very first inquiry if he would take me as a passenger on board his vessel, he answered without the least hesitation that he would with the greatest pleasure, and when on agreeing to accompany him, whatever course he might steer, I inquired what I should pay him for my passage. "Nothing, sir," was his reply. He afterwards asked me if I was aware of his actual destination, and on my informing him of my suspicion of its being to Cape Francois, he acknowledged it was, and on this head enjoined secrecy. This I solemnly vowed, and again adverted to the price for my passage, but he would listen to nothing on this head, and leaving me, begged me to have everything ready by the next Wednesday. His liberal demeanour affected me, yet still not having altogether dismissed the prepossession against him which had haunted my mind, I feared lest the circumstance of his giving me a free passage might engage him to treat me, or what was more consequent with me, my plants, with less attention. In order, therefore, to come to a clearer understanding and conclude our agreement, I conducted him to the ice-house, where I proposed to treat him with creams, but this he would not suffer. In short, all I could obtain from him was that I should have allowance to put on board some refreshments. In consequence, I shipped to his vessel 60 bottles of wine, 50 fowls, etc., etc., and as early as Tuesday embarked all my effects, my nopals only excepted. While this was passing, my small cases were in hand. When completed, I found that 8 of them readily entered, but exactly filled each of my large chests. I afterwards planted in each case 4 large plants of the nopal, covered with living cochineal, besides 20 leaves or articulations of nopal, just taking root, which would form so many plants, without reckoning 16 large ones, part of which had begun to root, in all nearly 300 plants. With these I mingled a number of other plants of wild cactus from Vera Cruz, upon which, on my return from Oaxaca, I had seen and recognized the sylvester cochineal, without suffering myself to be deceived, as I had before been, by the caterpillar of the destructive moth, which Don Ulloa mistook for the cochineal insect itself. As for the plants of vanilla, I placed them, divided into pieces 2 or 3 feet long, in a dozen casks and cases, but so intermingled with 20 other kinds of plants that none but a botanist could have distinguished the valuable ones from those which were not. I watered all my plants to complete saturation, in order that they might want no water for some time to come on board, and all being ready, I waited only the instant for sailing, the moments to which period were as tedious to me, and counted with as much impatience as the intervening time which divides an expecting lover from the mistress on whom he dotes. I spent the interval of my stay in bidding adieu to all my acquaintance, but especially Señora de Butillos, who was returned from the country for the celebration of the nuptials of her daughter and the general of the fleet. She, as well as her daughters, tendered their services in the most obliging manner, and even testified regret at my departure. In return, I wished them happiness and the prosperity of their family, nor ever were wishes more sincere. Messieurs Duparquet and Monsieur Fersen were not forgotten. I in like manner wished them every blessing of life. They pitied me much for having gathered so little fruit from my expedition. I thanked them for their commiseration, but was not so candid as to undeceive them. What was most irksome for me was taking leave of the governor. I, however, presented myself before him for the purpose of advising him of my departure, intelligence which occasioned him as much pleasure as I pretended regret on announcing it to him. He at the same time enjoined me to acquaint him what hour I was on board, in order that he might be present at the entrance of the port to take a deposition on the occasion in company with his secretary. This I promised, but with settled resolution to the contrary. So absurd did such forms appear to me, and so humiliating for myself. At bottom, however, it was a subject for laughter. His presence, undoubtedly, was for the purpose of ascertaining that I bore off nothing with me, and already were all my effects on board. I was solicitous of bearing away with me the letter of the Viceroy of Mexico. Note, it will be recollected our author addressed letters to the Viceroy for permission to travel in that kingdom. The answer, as is stated, was unfavorable, and the substance of the letter is given in the early part of the narrative. Translator. End quote. This was a curious piece, and had I obtained it, I should have suspended it from my nopals as a trophy. The governor had indeed promised to give it me, but, leaving him time for reflection, he perhaps considered that it would not much redound to the honor of his superior, and in consequence flatly refused it. On my last audience I insisted upon it. "You are very bold," said he angrily, "but did you offer me 100,000 crowns, you should not have it." His pretended anger had no effect on me. I told him, therefore, that it was requisite for me that I should possess the means of satisfying my patron that I had not been at liberty to follow up my botanical researches in the kingdom of Mexico. Still, however, he remained obstinate. He even went so far as to add that he would not give me the letter, though my patron were the King of France himself. "The King of France," said I, in a modest manner, but still with firmness, "is as much the protector of his meanest subjects as the King of Spain can possibly be of his, however elevated. When a criminal is banished, he receives the minutes of his trial, and shall I, who am free from crime, be treated less favorably?" My boldness pleased him. He did not indeed give up the object itself which I solicited, but he became calmer, and consented to notice in my passport the order of the Viceroy. He, moreover, withheld from me the passport for Vera Cruz given me by the Marquis de la Tour at the Havana, and I even suspected that this was done for the purpose of making it the base of a charge against that excellent man, which occasioned me great uneasiness. As for the letter of the Viceroy, I in good truth cared little about it. At the same time it gave me pleasure to have the governor fancy, as well as the rest, that I left the country much vexed at not having penetrated the interior. as such an opinion tended to remove any suspicion which might be entertained of the value of what I bore away. On my return to my lodgings, I wrote a letter to Don Antonio Ulloa at Mexico. It was in a complaining style. I observed, with respect to the refusal of the Viceroy, affecting a liberality, or rather a sort of rhodomontade, that however vexed I might feel on the occasion, I should never place this circumstance, or any exertion of mine, in the way of those Spaniards who might come to France for the study of the arts and sciences. But on the contrary, if it rested with me, they should experience even more indulgence than they had before been wont to enjoy, were it only to show that a Frenchman has too lofty a spirit to attend to trivial injuries. After this I settled all my bills. In order to discharge the whole of my debts, I found myself obliged not only to dispose of every article of furniture I had bought at Vera Cruz, such as my bed, chairs, tables, etc., but also of my watch and ring, after which, and all paid, I found myself with only 2 gourds (dollars) remaining, a sum which I reckoned would about cover the charges for going on board. Had I sought it, there is no doubt the purse of some one or other of my friends at Vera Cruz would have been open to me, but I thought such a procedure beneath me, and adapted to create suspicion of my individual character and that even of the nation itself to which I belonged. I therefore preferred depriving myself of everything, and thus avoided a possible obloquy. I had yet a few days to stay, which I spent in visiting and walking about. A singular procession, to which the delay of my departure enabled me to be a witness, on the octave of Corpus Christi Day, was of too curious a description to admit of my passing it over in silence. At the head of this procession were seen 6 gigantic figures in pasteboard 20 feet high, representing a male and female Indian, a Negro and Negress, and a Spanish man and woman, carried by shoeblacks, and dancing an allemande. These were succeeded by a stout fellow carrying a French figure made of straw, with a distorted haunch and all its limbs out of joint. This figure, which is fixed at the end of a pole as on a pivot, is made to move its limbs like the pasteboard harlequins of children, and its somersets and awkward motions are a subject of considerable merriment to the Spanish populace. Follow this harlequinade 10 other fellows in the guise of fish, with each a blown bladder with peas in it, fastened to the end of a stick, and with this they strike at random right and left whoever may be in their reach. These porpoises are precursors of a whale, framed on a large wagon, which is moved along by men beneath the exterior representing the whale. These men likewise occasionally make the whale open and shut its mouth, as if about to devour the silly fools afraid of it. After these, the different brotherhoods and religious orders, each with the image of their founder in silver, carried on a platform by 6 men, march in regular order. The residue of the procession presented nothing extraordinary. I remarked another religious practice at Vera Cruz, which will not appear less singular. When the sacrament of the wafer is carried to the sick, it is taken in a coach, magnificently gilt, and adorned with plate glass, in the same manner as the carriages of state of sovereign princes. It is drawn by mules, 4 abreast, which go a foot pace. At each of the angles of the imperial is a lamp. The person who carries the wafer sits at the extremity of the coach, in a species of niche purposely made for him. Opposite is a priest, his employment to drive away the flies, that the person who carries the sacrament may not leave his hold of the pyx, which he carries in his 2 hands. The coachman wears a great coat of scarlet, with silver lace and silver buttons, like our vergers at Paris. At the doors are 2 grenadiers and 2 miquelets. and behind the coach is followed by double basses, bassoons, violins, guitars, and other instruments, escorted by a crowd of people. During the procession, the great bell of the church is sounded gently. At last, Wednesday arrived, the day on which I had to embark. I was not without some dread, and in real truth this appeared to me the decisive day. At daybreak I caused all my cases of plants, as well as all my empty boxes, series longissima rerum, to be carried from my lodgings, and everything before 6 had reached the gate of the quay. I computed that at this hour the idle would be yet asleep, that the soldiers and officers, tired with the night guard, would be at rest in their hammocks, and that all unoccupied and inquisitive at the market. My conjectures were well founded, for, if a few sailors be excepted, 3 or 4 officers and the guard, I met with very few in the streets. I reached the port, followed by 30 porters, hired a boat, and returning to the quay, caused my cases, filled with earth, to be placed on the ground before the searchers. Thus far all went on very well, but in a few minutes soldiers, sailors, and tradespeople all rushed to see the plants, which the French botanist was bearing away. The officer of the guard complimented me on my researches and collection of herbs. The searchers admired them in stupid astonishment, but at the same time were so civil as not to sound any of the cases, though they might have done so without injuring any of my plants. And the head of the office, satisfied with my readiness to suffer examination, told me I might pass on. It is a certain matter that I had it in my power to defraud the king of his dues, and might have carried away in gold to the amount of 1,000,000 or a dozen talegas. But I was so well known that no one suspected my being capable of such baseness. I, however, made haste to get away with my things, lest someone more enlightened should play me, either unintentionally or from design, some scurvy trick or other. The whole of my goods being now in the boat, it put off, and I followed it, when I placed the cases in the chest, which I locked and caused them to be securely fastened on the deck. I recommended the sailors to be careful of them, and as an entrance fee on coming on board, presented them with a couple of gourds, which for the purpose I borrowed of the captain. I returned now on shore to announce to the governor that I should go on board at 8 o'clock. I could not see him, but held my promise effected, and never set foot in his house again. We did not, however, sail till several days after, which gave me much uneasiness, my plants, shut up as they were, necessarily suffering greatly. I had indeed at each side of the chests caused 4 holes to be made of 4 inches square, that I might be provided against stormy weather, when I should not be able to open the chests, and I went on board twice every day in order to give them air. Still, that I should be obliged to be separated from my dear plants, to sleep away from them as I did for 3 nights, this occasioned me indescribable torment, and never certainly would a miser feel more pain from the fear of losing his gold. The different trips on these 3 days cost me 3 piastres, which made the whole I was indebted to the captain 5. To acquit myself of this debt, I sold some very beautiful sleeve buttons, and this done, found myself poor as Bias. At length, even Spanish dilatoriness seemed near its end. The captain swore he would weigh anchor on Saturday. That day I went on board, according to custom, to give air to my plants at 5 o'clock in the morning. The captain's boat came on board to direct the pilot to weigh anchor. Imagining now his promise would be fulfilled, I put on board the rest of my things. But after waiting for the captain in vain till 3 in the afternoon, I gave up hopes of sailing that day. This night, however, I slept on board. On Sunday, the necessity of attending Mass again delayed us. I went on shore and took a last farewell of Mr. Ferson. I brought back with me on board likewise 5 or 6 cases of mold, in order to give more room to my jalap and vanilla plants. 8th June, 1777. At length, by 11 o'clock, we quitted the port, saluting the castle and the captain of the port with one gun, and 7 times exclaiming "Viva el Rey!" to which salute the captain's ship answered by one exclamation only. The weather was fine, we had a light breeze, and the log showed 5 knots. When a league from the city we perceived a boat making after us, which was soon alongside. On first distinguishing it, I had again, as at the Havana, the weakness to fancy that I was the object of its pursuit. I conceived with some appearance of reason that the governor, piqued at my having avoided the procès verbal, which he meant to draw up on my departure, had sent an order for me to be put again on shore. I was, however, soon undeceived, and saw that it came merely to put a man on board who had failed of being ready at the time of the last boat putting off. But this gave me an opportunity of learning a curious circumstance, which was that on the captain's waiting on the governor to receive his orders for Campeachy, the latter made inquiry if I was on board, and exacted a receipt from the captain for my body. He likewise inquired if I seemed very melancholy, to which question the captain answered in the affirmative. It will be readily conjectured that this little narrative amused me greatly. The whole of the bay abounds in excellent fish. End of section 18. Section 19 of Travels to Oaxaca by Nicolas-Joseph Thiéry de Menonville, an anonymous translation from the French. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 9th June. The night has been dreadful. Storms of thunder and lightning and torrents of rain seem to threaten a second deluge. Still, we had little wind, and the ship rolled dreadfully. In the morning I had a very interesting conversation with the captain of the ship, with whom it was now plain I should have every reason to be satisfied, as, observing me giving air to my plants, "I have found you out," said he to me in a low tone of voice. "You most assuredly are not about to transport this cochineal to your own country, but with a view of naturalizing it there?" The liberality he had shown towards me, the frank manner of his accost, determined me on confessing to him, which it was now of no service to deny, nor had I any room to repent my confidence, but, on the contrary, by his assistance, perfectly cajoled the sailors, who as well as the captain stood near me, and one of whom, more cunning than the rest, had taken one of the insects and crushed it on a white deal board, and observing the purple hue it gave, cried out to his fellows, "Why, this is cochineal, and cochineal is contraband." To divert them from the idea they might else entertain on this subject, the captain and myself planned a short scene, which played off seriously before them, estranged their fancies 100 leagues from the track they were taking. One afternoon, the captain being on deck with his officers and most of the seamen, asked me in a grave and inquisitive manner what I meant to do with all those plants. "They are," said I, in as candid and easy a manner as I was capable of assuming, "they are intended for a preparation, a remedy." "A remedy? For what complaint?" "For the gout." "Indeed! And pray what is the process of making it?" "Why, the nopals, cochineal, vanilla, and jalap are pounded together in a silver mortar. The mixture is afterwards boiled. The expressed juice, in proportion of an ounce at a time, is administered to the patient internally, and of the mark a cataplasm is formed, which is applied to the feet." "And are there no other ingredients in the prescription?" At this I seemed loath to tell the whole secret. I, however, acknowledged that the balm of Mecca was a component, incense, gold dust, leaf silver, and in a half-whisper, but loud enough to be heard without difficulty, some blessed lint which has touched the relics of Santo Toribio. This, with a few Latin words I intermingled in my answers, rendered my receipt exceedingly respectable in the minds of my auditors. Never indeed was nonsense listened to with more attention, and the bamboozled sailors as well were convinced of the purity of my intentions as of the efficaciousness of the prescription. I sighed, however, as much as I laughed at this ridiculous imposition, but it was indispensable that I might parry the denunciations which might have been made against me otherwise at Campeachy by some one or other of the crew. We were no more than 20 leagues from Vera Cruz, the wind at first very variable, afterwards strong, and then again a dead calm. We distinguished the Campeachy packet, which sailed a little before us at 3 leagues to leeward. In the evening we saw a shark. 10th June. The whole night through it rained, and the calm lasted till 3:30 p.m. I planted some vanilla, jalap, and nopals which I had remaining. 3 leaves of my large nopals, loaded with cochineal, rotted, a first cause of anguish, but I was somewhat consoled by having succeeded in settling the new-born cochineals upon other nopal leaves in a very healthy state. At 3:30 we had the wind abaft, making for the east-southeast. We were accompanied throughout the whole day by a shoal of bonitos, which played about our ship, and which, though against the wind, frequently swam around the vessel. This circumstance appears to me worthy of consideration. I likewise saw a number of beautiful dorados. The sky was clouded throughout the whole day, the temperature highly pleasing. 11th June. The sun again made its appearance with increased splendor. There was no rain in the night. We made but little way, and by reckoning were only 35 leagues from the point of departure. From 9 till 3 a dead calm, a clear sky and high temperature. We were followed by the same escort of bonitos and by a number of other small fish which had followed us from Vera Cruz. At 3 o'clock a wind from the north sprang up, and we ran 4 knots. Additional losses gave new cause for regret. I was obliged, after collecting the cochineal, to throw 5 other leaves of my large nopals into the sea. What a mournful prospect for the future, provided, as it is threatened, we should be 2 months out at sea. 12th June. The north wind continued till 3 in the morning, when it veered to the southeast. The night fine and without rain. At 8 the wind sunk into a calm, but a very light breeze from the north sprang up at 10. 13th June. The night beautiful and the morning lovely. At 8 a calm, a breeze at 10, rain at noon, succeeded by a calm till 5. Again had sight of the brigantine for Campeachy. It advanced no faster than ourselves. Rain and a storm at 8 in the evening. 14th June. The night tranquil, the wind changed from the north to the southeast. Though it blew hard, it yet did not prevent our progress. The whole morning squalls with rain. By reckoning, according to the pilot, we were 15 leagues from soundings and 40 from Campeachy. I lost the beautiful brood of Mexican parakeets which I had brought with me, and 3 other leaves of my nopals. My cochineals exacted all my attention. It was their time of bringing forth. I had nests to make for them. Nor was this all. The hurricanes that blew threatened to fill all my cases with salt water, which is utterly destructive of these plants. I was obliged to stand sentry over them on these critical occasions, and cover them with thick matting, giving them air only by means of the small side openings. Were it not for the extreme tediousness of navigation in this gulf, the voyage would have been pleasant, but the winds which prevail at this season, in alternation with calms, being south-southeast and north-northeast, they blow to no port whatever in a direct line. We enjoyed the sight of an infinite number of dorados, the most beautiful fish that swims the sea. Still, we had not a single man on board who had any inclination to fish. 15th June. The whole of the following night we had a terrible hurricane. The rain fell in large drops, and with a noise like balls of lead. The wind blew furiously from the northeast till 3 in the morning. At 5 it got round to the southeast. Neither on this nor on the preceding day was there intervention of calm. We had been upon soundings from 10 in the morning, and might expect to arrive in 5 or 6 days at Campeachy. We saw a great number of birds. The color of the sea underwent a change, and was of a greenish blue. 16th June. It blew hard all night with squalls of rain, the morning gray, the remainder of the day remarkably fine. In spite of all my care, my cases were washed by a wave. The young cochineals did not succeed in fastening on the Cactus sylvestris of Vera Cruz, called tunas. 10 other of my opuntiae had become rotten. Irremediable loss. The whole night through adverse wind. Abundance of porpoises of enormous bulk. 17th June. Saw land on the south and hoped to arrive the next day at Campeachy, but the wind, which blew from shore, kept us at a distance the whole day. The lands low and nearly level with the sea. A flock of boobies and frigate birds. The color of the sea changed by stripes according to the greater or less depth of water. At noon we had but 9 fathoms, the sky clouded. The captain added this day to the fund of continually regenerating inquietude with which I was assailed. He apprised me that at Campeachy we should have guards and soldiers put on board, and who knows how long we might lie off this place. A hurricane still more violent than that of the 15th was experienced this night. The thunder roared in loudest peals. Incessant flashes of lightning furrowed the atmosphere in every direction. Rain fell in torrents, and the whistling of the blast was even louder than the noise of the thunder and the waters. Dread and consternation seized upon everyone. We were obliged to take in every inch of canvas. Fortunately, my chests were well fastened and covered, but for which precaution, due to my nopals, they would have perished with my plans, and probably myself with them. 18th June. After the storm, the wind blew strong from the south. We must have been driven far indeed during the tempest, for we had from 16 to 26 fathoms of water, whereas the day before, when we made land, we had but 6 fathoms water, and were only 8 leagues from shore. For in this part, the number of fathoms denotes pretty nearly the number of leagues from land, the soundings lessening in gradual proportion as the distance becomes less. We saw a shark and a number of birds. 19th June. The soundings vary us in proportion as the north carried us forward, or the south drove us from shore. It seemed as though we were under some enchantment, and as if this wretched country fled from our approach. In 13 days we had not been able to go more than 90 leagues. This day we could not distinguish land, though the line gave but 6 fathoms in the evening. and though all night long we smelt the land and its flowers, but we had a dead calm. After the calm, a gust of wind succeeding, we got into 3 fathoms of water, and cast one of our anchors. We had no rain for 24 hours. 20th June. This day we saw land by 5 in the morning. It is more lofty eastward than towards the south. At sunrise we raised anchor in order to get nearer into land, and at 7 we distinguished the town of Campeachy on the south-southeast. It has no port, but merely a bad open road, liable to every wind, and lying 3 leagues from the town, which cannot be approached nearer by any vessel carrying more than 90 tons. At 9 we anchored. The bylander of 90 tons, which brought us from Vera Cruz, was laden with maize, for which the captain expected to find a market, intending to replace it by a loading of dyeing wood, which at Cape Francois would have paid him a considerable profit. But in order to succeed, great skill and circumspection were requisite, as this was an act of smuggling, and as smuggling is punishable with slavery and confiscation of property. The captain sold his maize to great advantage, as it was scarce, but no doubt intoxicated with success, he idled away his time and missed the opportunity of profiting to the full extent of his means. For my part, the delay to which he subjected us, and the additional losses I every day sustained among my nopals, not less than 40 of which I was obliged to throw into the sea, were sources to me of extreme vexation. I had moreover much room for complaint against the crew, and for the purpose of acquainting the captain with their conduct, I went on shore, and thus had an opportunity of visiting the town. San Francisco de Campeachy is a town of a square form, each side measuring upwards of 1,200 yards. It is perfectly well built of hewn stone in the Spanish style, with rectilinear streets, kept very clean, and of tolerable breadth. It is surrounded with curtains and bastions, but is without ramparts or terraces. The walls are 30 feet high by from 5 to 6 in thickness, but have no fosse. On the side toward the land, an immense pueblo or suburb of Indians encloses it, which much delighted me on account of the trees and thicket by which each house is surrounded. The suburbs may contain about 1,000 Indians. The population of the town, including the garrison with the citizens, may be about 3,000. Money at this place is so rare that nuts of cacao form the currency. For 8 of these nuts you purchase an egg at the market, and you are boarded at the inn for 2 reals the day. Debauchery is here prevalent to the same extent as wretchedness, but its ministers are such as could please but sailors alone, yet these so well that they reckon this a paradise. Such was the extremity of misery throughout all Yucatan about 6 years back, that according to the account even of the Spaniards themselves, there died from want no less than 40,000 persons. It is, however, doubtful, notwithstanding the immense extent of this province, whether it ever contained so many inhabitants. But on the contrary, should it be true, should any credit be due to the Spaniards, when they give such a shocking list of deaths, have we not to charge government with the most reprehensible neglect? How can it have been careless to such degree as to suffer this province to remain so destitute of provision, while with so much facility grain might have been supplied, either from the Havana, where all kinds of European corn abounds, and which is but 200 leagues distant, or from Vera Cruz, but 80 leagues away, and where a similar plenty reigns? This extensive region has the more need of assistance from the frequency of dearth. The cause is to be attributed to the droughts so fatal to this rocky base, and so frequent owing to the land lying low, and the want of mountains to break the clouds, which in consequence, except where the north winds encounter others from the south, and occasion them to break over the land, are constantly borne out to sea. Should the months of May, June, and July, those in which maize is sown, unfortunately pass without rain, all the hopes of the colonists are lost, and they are left wholly destitute of resource. The only trade carried on at Campeachy is in stone, sent to Vera Cruz, and dyewoods, immense piles of which, cut for upwards of 30 years, are seen in different parts, which the Spaniards prefer seeing rot before their faces to selling to any interloper, though they cannot possibly export them themselves. The whole time I was there I saw but 3 brigantines loaded, and at no time perhaps is there a greater number here. The culture of cacao is not allowed in this country, I know not from what lamentable policy, for it would succeed admirably. Cacao, in consequence, is so dear that the nuts or beans are used as money. The poor, who in consequence of the dearness of chocolate are deprived of the enjoyment of that beverage, substitute for it the pips of the Zapota marmui, whose fruit is large as an egg and bitter as coloquintida. I traversed the whole of the gardens in Campeachy, and found not one that was curious. I culled here at hazard 16 plants of 2 species of cactus without thorns, which afterwards were of great use to me. However, on the 6th July the captain repaired on board with intention to put off to sea, and within 3 days at farthest 3 barks were to bring us out to see the Campeachy wood we were to take on board. Notwithstanding all my pains, I was never able to procure either branches, leaves, or seeds of this tree to satisfy myself whether or no it is different from that we possess in our own colonies. I paid a sailor beforehand to procure me some, but they never came. We were just on the point of weighing anchor when the master of a boat which had brought us in a stock of wood for cooking saw my nopals and cochineal, and told me that they were cultivated within 6 leagues of Campeachy. Though I have strong doubt of the truth of this statement, I nevertheless felt much vexed at not having had an opportunity of ascertaining whether it was true or not, and in the former case of renewing my plants and recruiting my insects. Whether in hopes of other little presents in return, whether as a compensation for the vexation I endured from his having made so long a stay, the captain gave me the handsomest parrot, not larger than a dove, that ever perhaps was seen, its beak yellow at the base and black at the extremity, the whole of the body a bright green, the cheeks and the circle round the eyes of a blood red, the forehead, shoulders, and thighs of the same color, the upper part of the head crowned with yellow, the center white, and the hinder part azure blue, the wings green, blue, flame-colored, and purple, finally the legs yellow, the eyes blue, and the iris yellow. The captain moreover presented me with a cardinal and 3 tigers' skins. 11th July. At length, after a useless stay of 5 days, we found we must give up all hopes of the Dyewood coming on board. The poor captain thus saw all his dreams of fortune vanish, and in addition lost the 20 piastres he had paid down as earnest of the bargain to the person who was to have procured him the wood. Thus, either owing to negligence or to want of management, the unlucky man lost a profit of at least $3,000 for the wood at which Campeachy fetches but 3 reals, at the Cape is worth 3 piastres. I was exceedingly hurt that he had not made a confidant of me at an earlier period, as it struck me I might not only have given him good advice, but have obtained for him 100 ton of wood. We weighed anchor at 10 in the morning, and with a wind from the southwest advanced in a direction east-northeast at about half a league an hour. At 2 o'clock the wind changed, and we steered west-southwest. We were fain to anchor at 4 in 4½ fathoms. The whole night through it blew hard with much thunder, but no rain. 12th July. After looking out for a wind, but in vain, throughout the whole of the night, it blew from the south at 3 in the morning. We in consequence quickly raised anchor, and made northeast with a fine sea and beautiful weather, which continued till 10:30, when we were becalmed. After advancing, notwithstanding, about half a league, by 1:30 we had a breeze from the northwest, which was of much service to us. The water now again changed colour, and from a bluish green became of an azure hue, but at 4 o'clock the wind rounding to the northeast stopped our further advance, and we cast anchor to avoid being thrown nearer the shore, but not till, as the day before, we were within sight of land. At 9 o'clock, after many threats of rain, which however were followed by no effect, the wind veering again to the southwest, we weighed anchor. 13th July. This day the wind sunk into a calm at 10 o'clock in the morning. During the time it lasted, which was 2 hours and a half, the Spaniards took it into their heads to fish. They caught in the time 18 perch of a monstrous size, the smallest of them weighing upwards of 9 pounds. It is the Perca philadelphica described by Linné. This fish is of exquisite flavour, and is caught in depths of about 5 fathoms, with a hook 2 inches long and as thick as a crow's quill. The bait is a piece of bacon, meat, or entrails of fowls. About a foot above the hook a ball of about a pound weight is suspended to make the line sink. The fisherman has rarely time to throw out lures on the top of the water. About noon we had a breeze from the northwest, when we set sail anew, and at 3 again came into an anchor. Such is the navigation common along this coast, which runs north and south. The southeast drove us out to sea in the night, and in the afternoon the northeast again sent us in to shore. These are the winds predominant in these latitudes, but the winds blow sometimes south or southwest, and north or northwest, when a vessel may make some way under favour of them. It is requisite for 2 reasons to keep at not more than from 4 to 8 leagues from the coast. In the first place, because at a greater distance from shore, cayos, rocky shoals, and other sand banks occur, on which a vessel might be driven by the northeast wind. And secondly, because in the open sea, winds being more uncommon, and always, as well as the currents, adverse, a voyage would be of eternal duration. Indeed, no navigation in any part of the world is more difficult than that of the Gulf of Mexico. Should you leave soundings for the open sea, you are engaged in perpetual currents. Should you keep in soundings, you have only light winds, and can make but 4 or 5 leagues in 24 hours. On proceeding whether from the north or south seas toward Vera Cruz, or any other part of the Gulf of Mexico, it is not only necessary to reconnoitre the bank or soundings of Yucatan, but also those of Florida. The terms sondas, or soundings, is applicable to the whole of the sea of little depth which borders the Gulf of Mexico, from Cape Catoche as far as and even beyond Cape St. Augustine, to a distance from shore of from 6 to 60 leagues, and in such gradation with respect to depth that from the deepest soundings, that is to say in 68 fathoms, you may judge, proceeding inshore, how far you are from land, the depth diminishing a fathom at each league, so that at 1 league from shore there is seldom more than 3, and sometimes but 1 fathom water. To this notice respecting the Gulf of Mexico is to be added that the north is the predominant wind, and is felt here with more violence than in any part of America, and with such in the months of October and November as to render these seas almost impassable. End of section 19. Section 20 of Travels to Oaxaca by Nicolas-Joseph Thiéry de Menonville, an anonymous translation from the French. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 13th July. The north wind very strong. We were obliged to anchor till midnight. 14th July. At 10 in the morning the land breeze fell, the wind again blew from the north, and in the afternoon we steered east-southeast at the rate of 4 knots an hour. The temperature of the atmosphere on this sea is moderate, for notwithstanding the sky was clear and the sun exhibited itself in all its splendor, my thermometer at noon did not rise higher than 20 degrees centigrade, 77 degrees of Fahrenheit. We were now about 50 leagues from Campeachy. At 5 in the evening we came to our inn for the night, for somewhat similar must our constant practice of casting anchor every evening at the same hour be esteemed. We had an hour before seen a ship which was nearer inshore than ourselves. We likewise saw another brigantine, which we imagined to be the Havana packet. It sailed with the wind abaft and all its canvas out, but still made less way than as though we had an adverse wind. The whole day and night passed without rain, but the quantity of dew that fell was considerable. At 11 at night, the wind changing, we weighed anchor, but made very little way, the breeze from the southeast being very light and sinking to a dead calm by 7 in the morning, a calm that continued till the next day at 10, when the north again sprang up. 15th July. This day the northeast, at first feeble, increased in strength so as to advance us a league. A new anchorage at 5 o'clock. We had no rain at sea, though we distinguished it falling on shore. We avoided a projecting bank which makes the water appear of a yellowish-green color 3 leagues from the shore. We likewise discerned the Havana packet. It was the same which had sailed 5 days before us from Vera Cruz, and was now on its return to the Havana. The captain informed us that the governor, the Marquis de la Tour, had been recalled, a new motive for self-congratulation at having effected my object without delay, for could I flatter myself with ever meeting within any other governor who might succeed him so much kindness as I had met with from him? As this packet was destined to Campeachy, our captain forwarded letters by it. At midnight we weighed anchor. The wind southwest blew very feebly, and by 8 o'clock sunk into a calm. 16th July. At noon the northeast admitted of our tacking and made a little way, but by 3, the wind increasing, we were threatened with a storm. After a violent fall of rain we cast anchor, and sent a boat on shore opposite to a garita, or sentry box, to take in 12 barrels of water and 24 fanegas of salt. I was solicitous of visiting the salt pans here, and of making a slight harvest of the plants of the country, and of seashells, but the dread I had left any injury should befall my insects and plants during my absence prevented my indulging myself with this gratification. This was another sacrifice I had to add to the number I had already made on their account. I had, however, on the other hand, the satisfaction of already being in some degree compensated. My vanilla threw out some branches, my jalap and my nopals were budding. I had indeed lost a great many, but the residue were in good condition, and I had well-founded hopes of the most complete success. 17th July. We were detained all day by our pilot, who with 4 sailors had gone on shore and never returned. As he was an habitual drunkard, we conjectured that intoxication had been the cause of his delay. The breeze of morning had been feeble, calm succeeded as usual, and at 3 o'clock rain, but with little wind. The brigantine, which kept us company, advanced only a league the whole day long. After passing the day in greatest anxiety of mind, I advised the captain in the evening to fire a gun. I was mad with vexation. A charming breeze blew from shore, and this night we might have advanced at least 10 leagues. Unfortunately, the captain was by no means a good sailor, and we had not sufficient hands remaining on board to work the ship. 18th July. At length in the morning the boat returned with the sailors. They had heard the report of the patereros, though a league and a half distant to windward of us. The pilot dispatched them with the salt, but himself did not reckon upon getting on board before noon, as he was waiting for fowls, eggs, and swine, which the Indians were to bring him. The captain, in a rage, sent the boat again on shore, with orders for his coming instantly on board. He came by 4 o'clock, and we weighed anchor, but we had constant calms the whole day. My pretty cardinal having got out of its cage and fallen into the sea, the captain, without my knowledge, promised a good swimmer on board a bottle of brandy if he recovered my bird. The sailor jumped at the proposal, and the prospect of gain blinding him to the danger, he precipitated himself into the sea from the cabin window, and after swimming about 10 or 12 fathoms, recovered the little bird, held it in his mouth, and making for the rudder of the boat, seized on the ring of it, by means of which he held till a rope was thrown out to him, by means of which he got on board. I was uneasy in extreme the whole time he was in the water, lest some of the sharks, which are so common in this sea, alarmed by the noise he made on plunging in, should make for the spot, and devour my bold adventurer, and I felt mortified that the captain, for a matter of such little value, should thus have exposed the life of one of his crew. Fortunately he escaped, and besides the bottle of brandy, he earned a handsome pullicat handkerchief, of which I made him a present. We were at anchor opposite to a garita, or watch-house, in 3 fathoms water. These watch-houses are huts of wood, in form of square towers, 40 feet high, and raised at the distance of every 4 leagues along the coasts of New Spain. In these sentinels are stationed, whose duty it is to give advice to all vessels they perceive, and these sentinels, who are Indians, are relieved every 4 days. It so fell out that one of those appointed on guard at one of these watch-houses, being tired of his occupation, asked our people to take him and his luggage on board with them, and they very imprudently consented. I say imprudently, for it is expressly forbidden, under the most severe penalties, that any captain should receive an Indian on board. I had the curiosity to examine the packet of this poor fellow. It contained provision for 4 days, and consisted of a dozen tortillas of 8 ounces each, and about 2 pounds of the paste of maize, coarsely ground, which, steeped in water, forms a beverage singularly pleasing to the Indians. The man who came on board was stout and well made, 21 years of age, but had not a single hair on his chin. He had been married 2 years, but expressed not the least regret at leaving his wife. On my inquiring whether he had any children, he at first answered no, but correcting himself, as if he just recollected the matter, he said he had one pequeñito, or very little baby, and as he said this, he knotted his brows, as if he wished to express that it was too small to be worth mentioning. The fancy diverted us much. 19th July. We weighed anchor in the morning, and steered the whole day before the wind, a very light breeze from the southwest. At 7 we anchored, and raised anchor again at 8, the wind changing to the southeast. It was but a puff, which soon abated into a calm, and we anchored, but a breeze springing up, we again heaved anchor, and kept under sail the whole night through. 20th July. This day the north and south winds enabled us to proceed at the rate of a league an hour. The sky all the morning was overcast. At 3 the wind fell, and changed 4 times in less than half an hour. At length came on a dreadful storm of rain. After much entreaty, I succeeded in inducing the collection of half a dozen barrels of rain-water. 30 at least, if care had been taken, might in the time have been filled. After the rain we steered east-southeast, for our pilot, pretending his object was to avoid the currents, would not keep off the shore. We therefore made frequent tacks, and remained a long time at anchor. In the evening we found ourselves opposite to the Rio de Largatos, or the River of Crocodiles, which announced to us our having made 18 leagues since the day before. This was indeed a good day's work, but we had yet 40 leagues of shore to coast along. At length we quitted these melancholy and tiresome shores for the open sea, and deposited all our anchors in the hold, but being immediately after overtaken by a calm, we let down a small anchor. At 11 at night, the wind blowing again from the southeast, we made sail anew. It freshened soon to such a degree that from midnight to 2 o'clock we had advanced nearly 20 leagues, and the sea had again resumed an indigo blue color. Had the weather thus continued, we should have required but 4 days to reach the Havana. This was the first influence of fair weather we had had since our departure from Vera Cruz. The circumstance delighted me so much as to serve as a counterbalance to the grief I experienced at the loss of 15 or 16 leaves of nopals in the space of 3 days. To leeward we descried a wretched little boat. Soon we should have to see a number of considerable ships. Seas of our fortunate colonies, how different your appearance from that of this melancholy gulf! Numerous and rich vessels furrow your bosom in every direction, like our gay carriages on the magnificent roads of Paris, while the Gulf of Mexico is as bare of vessels as the cross-roads which lead to its insolent and wretchedly poor habitations. 22nd July. At 3 in the morning the wind had much slackened, though from the 20th we, notwithstanding, reckoned our progress to be 50 leagues, and consequently that we were beyond a shallow which extends the space of 2 leagues at the extremity of soundings in the direction north and south, and in latitude 23 degrees north, longitude 286 degrees 10 minutes from the meridian of Tenerife. In our reckoning we had erred, for by 2 in the afternoon a scream of horror from the deck called us to the fearful sight of this bank, which, concealed under water, extends itself right and left in branches through space of a league in breadth by 3 in length. Instantly we changed our tack, and on sounding had a bottom of reddish rock in 45 fathoms. The rock, apparently fragments of coral, was blended with herbs. The shelf seemed of a reddish color in every part, and gave a ruddy appearance to the water. Fortunate was it for us that we encountered this shelf in the daytime. Had it been night, we should have passed over it and probably have perished, for though the sea does not break on this bank, and though it appears to be covered by a depth of water, the actual soundings upon it, as well as the nature of the shelf, are altogether unknown. In remembrance of our having escaped this danger, we drank 2 bottles of excellent cider, of which the captain made me a present, and which was equal to champagne, and found our spirits heightened by the libation. 23rd July. We passed the night without any danger. The south wind had blown, but the ship made no way. We caught a prodigious porpoise, 8 feet long by 5½ in diameter. Its tail was 2 feet broad. The fish caught was a female. In cutting up, no doubt, some of the lacteal ducts were separated, as the animal yielded more than a quart of very pure and remarkably white milk. One of the vessels from which this milk flowed was in diameter of equal breadth with my little finger. The womb, in which I very distinctly saw the fallopian tubes, measured at the entrance of the vagina 4 inches and a half. The exterior orifice was very straight, callous, wrinkled in folds, and of a substance and tissue so close that with difficulty could one introduce the little finger, nor did it appear susceptible of further expansion. The diameter of the vagina, easy of dilation, was 1.5 inches. At the extremity of the vagina from the interior was a species of valve, resembling that of a sucker of a pump, very much wrinkled and highly capable of expansion, and the internal capacity of the canal it formed, of inferior length to the vagina, appeared to be of similar diameter, and equally fit for distension. At the end was another sucker-like valve, which served as a door to a second similar receptacle of rather greater capacity than the former. Finally, there was a third receptacle, closed by a similar valve, with the extremity of which the 2 fallopian tubes communicated. These were of a spongy substance, and internally displayed an infinite number of vessels, some of which seemed lacteal or lymphatic, others conductors of blood, but folded one within the other and crossing each other, so that at the first glance they might be mistaken for a mass of little worms rolled up together. In the stomach of the animal were several small fish, which had already attained that state of digestion which made them look as if somewhat too much boiled. The ship was surrounded by a numerous troop of these animals, which, notwithstanding their enormous size, seemed in the water no larger than carp of 8 or 10 pounds weight. 24th July. In the night we had a light wind, but the day a dead calm. At the rising of the moon in the evening, the wind again rose. 25th. At 10 this morning we caught a shark. It happened to be the squamous tiburo of Linné. It was 5 feet long, had a fin at the anus, 5 lineary ports in the neck for the bronchiae of the pulse, a large head and a broad neck, its teeth in the lower jaw triangular, of similar breadth, but even sharper than lancets, and about 1 inch in length. Of these teeth the animal has 3 rows. The inmost row turns back on the gums. Those of the jaw are subulated like the teeth of a pike, and, as the others, are 1 inch long. This animal is of hideous appearance in the water, and shines by day as well as by night. It was harpooned with a javelin 1 foot long, attached to a pole of 6 feet. However hard its skin, which resists the point of a knife, it was not proof against this weapon. But the monster made less resistance in the water, and fought less on deck than did the porpoise we had caught before. It was surrounded as usual by the pilot fish, so called on account of its constantly advancing in front of the shark. This fish is a kind of perch, transversely striped with alternations of black and yellow. Part of the shark was cooked and placed on table, but I could not prevail on myself to touch it, notwithstanding it is a favorite dish with the people of Campeachy, a predilection which speaks little for the delicacy of their taste, as there is abundance of fish in their roadstead of exquisite flavor. We afterwards caught another of such monstrous size that we needed tackle for lifting it on board. It was a female, but of a different species. This animal was 10 feet 4 inches French in length, and from the back to the belly measured 2 feet and a half. The skin of the back was perfectly blue, of the belly white. It had the same proportions as and resembled the one before described, with the following exceptions. The teeth of the upper jaw were curved towards the throat from the base. They were moreover sharp, pointed, but rounded like barley and jagged like the teeth of a saw. In the upper jaw it had but 1 row of teeth, but in the lower 3. The head was not proportionately large, though somewhat of the same shape, being only more oblong, and somewhat less flattened than that of the male. The vagina was 6 inches in diameter, and was not callous and in folds as I had observed in the dolphin. The rectum terminated with the vagina in one common orifice, which may be regarded as the anus. By the side of the matrix were 2 prominences which might be taken for teats, and of which the interior orifices terminated in the womb, but had no communicant ducts, whether glandular or lacteal. The vagina was 6 inches long. At the extremity it divided into 2 cavities, 2 feet and a half in length, by a breadth of a foot, but susceptible of considerable distension. The orifice of either of these trunks was filled with a spermatic matter, the interior occupied by an extremely fine and spongy membrane attached throughout its whole length to the inward and upper part of the cavity, and full of an infinite number of cells, each containing an egg with its yolk, and an embryo or fetus 1.5 inches long. The yolk of the egg was like, but somewhat paler than that of a hen, but the mucilaginous part, instead of being white, was of a greenish yellow, resembling bile. In order to extract an egg from one of the cells, it was necessary to break the cell. This cavity was assuredly an ovary. The substance of it was of a whitish color, transparent, lymphatic, greasy, and the membrane easy to break. Disgust prevented my counting the number of eggs, but in every ovary I certainly saw at least 100. I took some of the feti and preserved them in rum. I am not certain whether or no amphibious animals have 2 vagina, but it appears very evident from dissections that they have 2 ovaries. The shark was viviparous, as I believe are all. Some of the feti, which I notice my having preserved, I sent to Mr. Daubenton. At noon we had a heavy fall of rain, and for 2 hours successive showers. This, by occasioning wind, enabled us to make a slight progress, but at 5 we were becalmed, and continued so until the moon rose, when it began to blow pretty fresh. 26th July. The wind of the night was succeeded by slight squalls, by which we advanced about half a league an hour. Some showers fell, but unattended by wind. The crew were uninterruptedly employed in manoeuvring so as to catch the least puff, but without success. Did we stand on either tack, the sails scarcely filled, and the ship barely obeyed the rudder. We fell in with 2 amazingly large pieces of floating timber loaded with birds. The pilot stated us by reckoning to be 25 leagues from the Florida soundings. Our latitude was 25 degrees. 27th July. The morning a dead calm, provoking quietude, discouraging inertia. Why must I thus be stayed, exclaimed I repeatedly, when it would be so grateful to my heart to reach our destination. My cochineals brought forth now a 2nd time, and I had no more plants on which I could multiply them. 1 young leaf of a nopal and 1 old one had just died. One half of another had been consumed by a Blata lucifera cockroach, and I saw that I ran great hazard of losing the new generation. However, I had the consolation to see 2 plants of vanilla throw out other branches. A number of bonitos swam about our ship. The name applied to this species of Coryphena is derived from the Spanish bonito, the augmentative of bueno, good, and signifies very good or excellent. We likewise saw some dorados and other species of Coryphena, the equivalus of Linnae. One of these was caught by our men. From head to tail it measured 4 feet 3 inches, and at the stomach was 1.5 feet in diameter. The sea contains no fish more beautiful, nor indeed another that equals this in beauty. The body is of a golden yellow, resplendent above a changeable green, marked with round spots 1 inch in diameter of an ultramarine blue. The fins and tail are a brilliant green. In calm weather, its shining colors render it distinguishable at the depth even of 50 feet. End of section 20. Section 21 of Travels to Oaxaca by Nicolas-Joseph Thiéry de Menonville, an anonymous translation from the French. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 28th July. We had some wind again at night, and the horizon was so much overclouded that we apprehended a terrible storm. The wind we had, however, was adverse, and all night long we had our head to the south. In the morning we made a tack north-northeast and were stopped by a calm. Ever since 8 o'clock I had observed in the north-northeast division of the sky a cloud shaped like a horse's tail, spreading in the direction from north-northeast to south-southwest, and which appeared to be the precursor of calms, in the same manner as the Procellaria, in my opinion, truly indicates wind. 29th July. By midnight the calm ceased, and we made about 5 leagues in 9 hours. From 9 to 11 again calm, then wind till 1, when my horsetail cloud appeared anew. We sounded, but found no bottom. The pilot, who fancied himself upon the Florida soundings, was thus in error, and I the more vexed on reflecting that, although but 60 leagues from the Havana, we had scarcely effected half our voyage. What tiresome navigation! 30th July. At 4 in the evening of the 29th a wind sprang up, which from its direction we recognized for a brisk and regular gale. This continued till the morning of the 30th, when the wind from the land succeeded. By observation we had now passed the Florida soundings, and all the night long were on the lookout to avoid Las Tortugas, an assemblage of 4 or 5 small islands on the border of the soundings of the peninsula of Florida. All this day the sky was overcast, and we had several showers of rain. On visiting my nopals I found 3 leaves dead. I cleaned all the others and dusted them to remove the white powder with which they had become covered. I likewise exterminated all the Sylvester cochineals, which had intermingled with the fine, and which had smothered a considerable number. Finding myself overstocked with those cacti of Vera Cruz, frightfully armed with thorns, I threw 13 of them into the sea, after which I dried the Sylvester cochineals I had collected, in order to send them to my father and to Messrs. Rostigan and Jussieu. While thus cleansing my chests, or rather my gardens, I discovered 3 chacherlas and a Scolopendra morsitans, centipede. Fortunately, these insects are no devourers of cochineal, or otherwise adieu to my treasures. The employ I took was for some time an amusement to me, though fatiguing. 31st July. After luffing up the whole night long to avoid the shore, at daybreak we discovered the coast of Cuba, and had advanced 20 leagues into the channel. The next day we should distinguish the Havana, and 2 days after be out of the Bahama Channel, a prospect which assured us of a prompt return. In the meantime our crew insisted on entering the Havana, but the captain and myself could not consent to this without running the greatest risk, not only of our liberty, but even of our lives. We therefore determined on forcing obedience, and in case of any obstinate persistence on the part of the ship's company, to put the most mutinous to death at a preconcerted signal. However violent such measures may appear, it must be considered that it could be of no consequence to our crew what port they made, whereas it was important for us to avoid the Havana. Carried forward by the wind and current, by noon we were opposite Bahia Honda, Deep Bay. For 2 days we had had the most charming weather possible for our voyage, but we had still 400 leagues to sail, and had not yet attained the end of our toils. In fact, the wind increased, and we had a terrible night. From the heavy shocks our small vessel received, I was fearful she would founder. We lowered the sweeps of the foresail and reefed the mainsail, spite of which the vessel rolled so dreadfully that we were constrained to sleep on the floor, an inconvenience thanks to my apprenticeship to travels, which was to me no great hardship. 1st August. This morning, spite of contrary winds, the currents having impelled us all night long, we distinguished the tableland of Mariana, and at 4 in the evening a fresh tack had carried us under the guns of the Morro Castle. From a distance I distinguished the country house of Señor Huet, the neighborhood, and the Fort del Principe, the works of which he had shown me. The day was fine, but a violent wind from the north-northeast occasioned us at 6 in the evening to reef again our sails, which we had spread to the gale. An unlucky maneuver was near being fatal to us. All was noise, and the men running about with precipitancy increased the evident alarm. And as for myself, I experienced the greater dread from the consideration of my being so rich, so truly rich, possessing what I had so much coveted. I had no such fears on my voyage to Mexico. 2nd August. The wind keeping at northeast all the night through, we had made but little way by 9 in the morning. This morning, the first time I had ever seen a storm in the morning in America, I was witness to one most violent. The whole of the day and all the succeeding night was a period of toil and fatigue, owing to our perpetual tacks. At 3 o'clock we distinguished the pine tree of Matanza. The sea ran dreadfully high, and we were the more loath to enter the mouth of the Bahama Channel from our sails and rigging being in the worst possible condition. Here was a fresh evidence of Spanish idleness. During the frequent calms we had experienced, nothing would have been more easy than to have tightened the shrouds, and for want of this precaution, which I so strongly but ineffectually recommended, we were obliged to lay to and lose much time. 3rd August. After numerous tacks this day, the sea constantly rough, we were fain at night to take shelter in the Bay of Matanza. This bay is nearly a league over at its mouth by a depth of 2. 3 rivers, or rather rivulets, empty themselves into it. Towards evening we anchored about half cable length from the shore. The fort, a square building flanked by 4 bastions, is about 60 yards long. The curtain, which fronts the sea, is defended by a crownwork, which seemed in excellent condition. I entered it as a conqueror, and found no sentinels either at the barrier of the covered way or at the gates, so that, without interruption, I marched to the parade, where I found 6 soldiers playing at cards. These, without leaving their game or asking me any questions, suffered me as quietly to depart as I had entered. However well fortified this castle, it seems to me of no other utility than to prevent a landing, and hinder merchant ships or privateers from taking in water, for it could not certainly withstand the fire of a 64-gun ship. Matanza, the place of slaughter, which lies at the bottom of the bay, is an ill-built spot, in a low, marshy, moist, and unhealthy position. It has no trade, nor any cultivation about it. The people who inhabit it present the most disgusting spectacle, and render it the scene of the most abominable filth and frightful misery. They are covered with crabs of a monstrous size, which prey on them, and which in turn serve them for food. The village stands at the union of two small streams, which serve to float down timber for the Havana from the interior of the country. A wretched redoubt of stone, denominated a castle, stands in front of the village and defends the bottom of the bay. We put into this miserable place merely for the purpose of tightening our shrouds and taking in water, but the desertion of a sailor and the drunkenness of the pilot delayed us 2 days. 5th August. This day I bought at Matanza 6 cardinals, 2 siris, 2 larks, and 8 other very pretty birds, of the names of which I am ignorant. I brought thence likewise a number of leaves of a cactus, called in our colonies la raquette espagnole, and the value of which I intended to prove by my cochineals. Again, had I the misfortune to see 3 leaves of my nopals rot. What losses! What regret at not having reached Saint-Domingue! 6th and 7th August. At length we weighed anchor and left the bay. On the 7th we were 20 leagues from Matanza. Our wretch of a pilot again steered a wrong course, owing to which we did not reach Los Martires before night, which we ought to have made in the morning, in order to reach the mouth of the Bahama Channel. 8th August. In consequence of the error of the pilot, we were obliged to luff up all night in a dreadful sea, and it was not till the morning of the 8th, at 5 o'clock, we took a direct course northeast, with a wind from the southeast. The currents had carried us on so far that by noon we were in latitude 26 degrees 6 minutes. Thus, notwithstanding the wind in course of the night, we had advanced 42 leagues. The sea ran high the whole day, but it became calmer in the evening. We had 3 separate showers. This day we caught a booby, the plumage of which was brown without any spots, its beak blue, its eyes fiery and capable of direction with ease towards the beak, which renders it of frightful aspect, its legs and feet of a chamois color. After examination I gave it liberty. 9th August. Had the wind been favorable, we might this day have got out of the channel, but blowing from the northeast, we were obliged to luff up through the night, steering on a northwest and southeast course, for fear of running on the shoals right and left. The sun rose with a horizon covered with clouds, a prognostic in these seas of bad weather, which failed not in this instance. We had a dreadful sea, the wind suffocating, the waves of monstrous size dashing against the ship, and the natural clash occasioned by the opposition of the wind and current made a terrible noise. We constantly luffed up in the same direction, but still advanced 35 leagues. Such indeed is the force of the current, that however high the sea may run, it never breaks with that surge noticed in other seas, but each wave, impelled variously and in adverse direction by the wind and current, and with equal power by each, rises in a pyramidal form, and sinks with a crash on its base. It may hence readily be conjectured how great the labour and fatigue to which the ship and its crew in these parts are exposed. In order to form an opinion of the origin and effect of the famous current which carried us along, We must reflect that this channel is the vast outlet of the waters of the Gulfs of Honduras and Mexico and the more southern seas, as well as of the accumulations these gulfs receive from the rivers Amazon, Orinoco, Magdalena, Mississippi, and an infinity of others of inferior volume. The waters of these seas and rivers, confined by the barrier formed by the archipelago of the Caribbee Islands, east and west, rush forward to the channel of Bahama, the deepest of all, no doubt, formed by the different islands, and thus find an exit into the North Sea. In a dead calm this current runs 4 knots an hour, with a contrary wind 4 1/2. The Trident, a Spanish ship of war of 60 guns, was on one occasion adversely carried from before the Havana, notwithstanding she had the wind abaft and all sails set, as far as off the coast of Carolina, without being able to stem the flood. The sea was so frightful during the night that we merely hoisted the mainsail. The wind was east, our direction north, and according to my computation, the current ran westerly. This caused me to imagine that by drifting we should run towards the coast. Thrice did I feel an inclination to make the observation to the captain, and as often was I prevented from the fear of passing for an importunate and ridiculous interferer. It was not long, however, before I had to repent of my silly modesty, for by 2 in the morning the captain, or rather terror personified, came to waken me. He was in tears and in perfect despair. "What is the matter, Captain?" "Males somos, perdite somos. We are all lost." "How so? What is the matter?" "Hay fondo. We have soundings." In fact, the plummet had been thrown, and 40 fathoms was the result, the wind as well as the current bearing on shore. "Paciencia, paciencia," said I. I went on deck, and now assuming more boldness and confidence, I advised our steering southwest. The captain, the pilot, and mate agreed with me in opinion. We tacked, and in less than 2 hours were out of the soundings. 10th August. The sun rose, lowering with a sadly portentous sombreso of thick black clouds. A number of gulls and other sea-birds flew toward shore at the sight. My birds picked at their food hastily, and the song of my larks, infallible Bassandras, foreboded a perilous day. And, in fact, squalls and hurricanes succeeded one the other with the greatest rapidity. I was fearful we should not be able to take an observation, but fortunately a gleam of sunshine allowed us to ascertain our latitude, which was 29 degrees. Thus, as I told the captain would be found the case, the vessel, spite of opposite winds, had, by the mere force of the current, drifted more than 20 leagues, and carried us through the channel. Now was the time to steer for Europe, had we that course to take. But we were bound for Santo Domingo, where not only on my own account, but also on account of my insects, which had light only once in 24 hours, I was so anxious to arrive. 11th August. The violence of the wind gradually abated. The sea was pretty calm, the heavens serene, but the currents had borne us 44 leagues to the north-northeast. The wind veered towards the south in such a manner as to premise we might be able to shape an eastward course, after which we should only have to lessen our latitude in order to reach Santo Domingo, where with the wind abaft we might arrive in a week. We found ourselves this day in 31 degrees 30 minutes on parallel with Charleston, Carolina. At 4 in the afternoon caught a bird, called by the Spaniards tinofa, the laris of Linné. 12th August. Calms prevailed till evening. The little wind occasionally breathed was from the southwest. We steered southeast by east. At 3 the wind freshened in the same quarter, and we directed our course southeast. 13th and 14th August. The wind gradually increased on the 13th, so as to allow our making 4 knots an hour. On the 14th at noon we were becalmed, but a gentle gale sprang up at 4. Our latitude this last day was 31 degrees 6 minutes. The whole of the 14th we spread all our canvas to catch the little wind that blew. Our sailors again caught a tiburro. Their avidity for this wretched fish characterizes at once their laziness and want of taste. Being easy to catch, they prefer it to the dorado, a fish exquisitely delicate, but which would have required more pains to take. They devoured the whole of it in one day, notwithstanding it weighed upwards of 30 pounds. 15th August. A light wind from the southwest advanced us 2 or 3 leagues in course of the night, but was succeeded the whole of the following day by a dead calm, a cruel calm, which threatened the frustration of all my toilsome, tedious labours. 4 more of my nopals I found this day had perished, one of them with 3 young leaves, and an ample progeny of young cochineal. What on this, as on similar occasions, surprised me greatly, my misfortunes proceeded constantly from the plants too weak to resist the injuries of the sea air and their confinement, and not from the insects, as I the most expected, but which proved to be extremely patient and astonishingly hardy. Not one of them died. I had therefore considerable reason for self-congratulation on having collected 3 other species of cacti at Campeachy, all of which afforded nourishment to the cochineal, though more sparingly and with less advantage than the nopal. At sunset the wind constantly feeble, after veering from the southwest to the southeast, sank into a calm. 16th August. The wind still southeast. After luffing some time we steered nearly southwest, advancing about half a league an hour. At 11 at night the wind freshened. 17th August. Saw to leeward a frigate and another armed vessel, in company with 4 ships under colours with red and white stripes, and a number of goletas. We hoisted a red flag with a burgundy cross and fired a gun. They made sail for us, and the frigate, mounting 30 guns and commanded by Captain Cherry from New York, placed us between him and his galley, in which were 8 men with 4 cannonades, ready levelled and with matches lighted. She hailed us in English. We were able to answer in Spanish only. She then sailed round our stern to our starboard side. The frigate put out her boat with an officer and 6 men on board, but the officer, understanding no other than the English language, could but give us the longitude, which was 75 degrees 17 minutes west of Paris. We showed him our passports from Vera Cruz and our register, and after signifying that we came from that port, we presented him some provisions, such as potatoes, bananas, and callalon, with which he left us perfectly satisfied. What, however, is singular enough, we omitted to inquire the name of the commander of this small squadron, and which party it espoused, that of the English or the rebels. We were, however, led to conclude that it was the former, from his telling us his vessel, formerly the Boston, was now called the Daphne. The 4 vessels under escort, all of them mounted royals, the first I had ever seen. We continued our course northeast. The full moon, on rising, brought us wind with showers, and I constantly found that every change of the moon was accompanied by similar variations. 18th August. The last observation was more clearly verified this day. At 3 in the morning we had a brisk wind and rain, and successive showers coming from every point of the compass. The whole of the morning we were crossed by contrary winds, and obliged to tack every instant. At noon the wind increased, blowing first from the south and afterwards from the southwest. A gloomy sky now threatened a storm. The wind still increased, and some rain fell. We deemed it right to lower our staysail and reef the mainsail, but we lost much precious time by our vain alarm, for the storm blew over and the night was fine. From noon we had advanced about 1.5 leagues an hour, and caught a fish, the Gasteros terus of Linné. 19th August. A cursed calm from 3 in the morning till 9. At this hour and till the next day we had wind from the south and steered northeast by east, advancing but 3 knots an hour. A colony of small migratory fish followed us on the right and left of our rudder, consisting of perch, Gasteros terus, and pilot fish. These shoals of inhabitants from a different hemisphere, which are occasionally seen in different seas, resemble so many wandering colonies seeking an asylum. Do they encounter a ship, to them it seems a rock, a bank, an island, a shore. They constantly find food in its vicinage, and exertion in swimming, unnecessarily borne as they are in its wake. At length the vessel arrives, and the colonies shift to their quarters. 20th August. The wind blowing northeast by east, we steered southwest by west. It afterwards veered to the south, wavering. We made scarcely 3 knots an hour. This slow sailing is little less vexatious than a calm, but more advantageous. We had today no rain. The pilot reckoned us in the longitude of the point of Mezi, in latitude 33 degrees 21 minutes, so that we were yet 250 leagues at least from our destination. The land we sought for thus seeming to fly before us. Indeed, it appeared to me that the captain and pilot had acted very wrong in suffering us to be carried by the current from the Bahama Channel to so high a latitude as 33 degrees. I make no doubt that the elevation of our latitude above what we need to have made it was the cause of our being subject to all the calms and contrary winds we had experienced, as if we had avoided the current in latitude 28 degrees, we should have been secure of the trade winds much earlier, and at any rate, if we had coasted by the Lucayos, should have been certain of land breezes. The captain, in answer to my observation, pretended that on the day we were in latitude 28 degrees, the wind was unfavorable to our making eastward, but this lame excuse was contradicted by my journal. The wind on that day was east, and by steering south, the composite action of the east wind and the current, which ran to the north, would assuredly have borne us in a southeast direction. This day I had to regret the loss of other nopals, and I felt it the more bitterly from the circumstance of the impossibility of fixing the insects attached to the dead plants on any other, as will appear in the appendix, wherein I treat of the cochineal insect. I was perfectly in despair, and almost gave up the hope of being able to transport my little colony in health and safety to Santo Domingo, the cause of which I could only attribute to the length of our voyage, and the want of friends, which had prevented my making more favorable arrangements. End of section 21. Section 22 of Travels to Oaxaca by Nicolas-Joseph Thiéry de Menonville, an anonymous translation from the French. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 21st August. This day the wind, which during the night had blown but gently northeast by east, at 6 in the morning, veering to the northeast, blew with greater force, and we advanced 5 or at least 4 knots an hour, and found ourselves in the longitude of Cape Nicholas Mole, latitude 29 degrees 49 minutes north. The sky was beautiful, a line of clouds branching in slips fine as the flax which is spun from the distaff, in the direction north and south indicated. At length the speedy presence of the winds for which we sighed. Should they continue favorable, but only 6 days, they will carry us to Cape Francois. I observed Mercury an hour before sunrise in the constellation Cancer. 22nd August. While running south-southwest at the rate of 5 or 6 knots an hour, the wind increased to such a degree that by 5 in the evening we were obliged to lower our tops and reef our mainsail. At noon, by observation, we were in latitude 28 degrees 44 minutes and in the longitude of Tortuga. The sun rose through a red and lowering atmosphere. At setting it was entirely obscured by vapor, which covered the horizon in every direction. At 10, notwithstanding we had lowered our tops and topgallants, we sailed at the rate of 5 knots. The waves beat with a deep and hollow sound against the sides of the vessel, and shook it by the violence of their percussion. 20 times did they break over the deck, and a violent rain falling at the same time, we were fain to close the hatchways and put up all our deadlights. I endeavoured to sleep, but in vain. One could rest nowhere. Every billow threw the ship on her beam ends, and not anything could be kept steady on the deck. The sea ran dreadfully high. Our fragile vessel was now raised 100 feet from the level, and now engulfed in a hollow abyss, while the noise of the winds in the rigging was equal to the roaring of thunder. I wished much to contemplate this horrible scene, but there was no keeping the deck, and what in fact could be seen in a night as dark as Erebus. We distributed brandy to our men, who seemed in spirits, and sang in the midst of the storm, while we were a prey to the most alarming apprehensions. At first I was inclined from this circumstance to conclude that the danger was not imminent, but the solace of this fancy endured but for a moment. I reflected on the nature of these beings, so differently modified to us, and blamed my first conclusion. 23rd August. Day beamed, yet brought us no alleviation, for the tempest raged with undiminished violence. The impetuous winds howled in the shrouds. Dark clouds overhanging obscured the whole horizon, and the sea ran mountain high. Our crew were harassed to death, the captain dejected, our rigging slack, and our sails in shivers. Everything, in short, made us dread exceedingly a night like that we passed, while, spite of some reddened clouds in the west, toward 6 in the evening, which we were willing to hail as a presage of a calm, or at least an abatement of the tempest, the winds seemed to redouble their force, and a heavy storm of rain continued till midnight. 24th August. This morning, though the sea still ran very high, the violence of the wind had somewhat abated. It blew now from the south-southeast. On rising, I distinguished a gleam of sunshine shooting through some light clouds, and as the day advanced, the sun showed itself at intervals, and enabled us to take the latitude at noon, which we found to be 26 degrees 28 minutes. Our longitude was that of the western cape of Maguana, so that, notwithstanding the storm, as I had premised, we had lost nothing of our longitude, and on the other hand had diminished our latitude by nearly 50 leagues. We steered east-southeast, certainly a bad course, for had we directed the vessel to the south, we should in 2 days had Maguana under our lee, and in 3 days after might have made the cape, from which we were only 120 leagues distant. Though I have made 7 voyages at sea, I never was witness to such dreadful weather, unaccompanied with lightning and thunder. The storm had driven from us most of the shoal of colonists which surrounded our rudder, for of all their number remained only 2 small white pilot-fish and 2 large black perch. My parrot, and indeed all my birds, foreboded the bad weather by their agitation, fluttering and louder and hoarser notes than usual. I lost none of them. My jalap suffered so much as to make me apprehensive of its perishing, but fortunately my insects and nopals received less injury than I expected. My first object was the preservation of the former, for I conjectured that I might meet with nopals in the king's garden. 25th August. The wind blowing east-northeast, we steered south till noon, when it appeared by observation we were in 26 degrees 25 minutes and on the meridian of the Caicos, the winds variable and light throughout the day. 26th August. Calms and contrary winds again fettered us to these seas. It seemed as if we were never to be released from our captivity, and as though the captain and pilot were in league to prolong it. The last fault they were guilty of was in not making way to leeward by a west-southwest course. We should, it is true, by this means have gotten lower down than Maguana, but by help of the southwest winds, which afterwards prevailed, we should have recovered our longitude, and have advanced 80 leagues on our way. It certainly was most vexatious to have been upwards of 3 months at sea, and have run nearly 2,000 leagues to fetch a place but 500 leagues in a direct line from our point of departure. At night, however, we had westerly winds, but so feeble, as also on the 2 following days, that we scarcely proceeded at the rate of a league an hour. This, however, was a better fate than befell us on the 29th, when we had a dead calm. 27th August. At 9 in the morning this day, we fancied we discovered a shelf, a white band 30 troughs, 190 feet English, long, was seen nearly in the direction we were sailing. Was this the trunk of some enormous tree, such as is sometimes seen in the Gulf of Mexico? Was it some vessel which had capsized? Round it was seen a number of sharks, and skimming about flocked a variety of sea-fowl, whence I conjectured it to be the carcass of some vast monster of the sea. The captain, against my will, as I regretted the loss of so much precious time, steered towards it, and approached it within the distance of 30 fathoms. But at 100 we already distinguished what it was by the putrid smell it exhaled. One single piece of this leviathan appeared to be 15 fathoms long, besides which were 7 or 8 continuous but disjunct pieces from 2 to 3 fathoms in length. The breadth of it was 7 fathoms, and its thickness, besides about 3 feet which floated out of the water, from 6 to 7 fathoms. It had been rotting, no doubt, a considerable length of time, for it resembled nothing but a hide blown out, misshapen, and without trace of any form. The entrails, floating on the water like the filaments of molluscae, extended in network the space of 80 feet. Many separate parts were seen about it at the distance of about 20 fathoms from the main piece. We clearly distinguished the whole to be rotten flesh, notwithstanding a greasy froth of dazzling whiteness floated all around. Some parts of the carcass were of a blackish hue and gore-like. The whole undulated irregularly with the water, whence I concluded that the bony frame was dissolved, and that, of course, the monster must have been long dead. But again, to what enormous animal could these vast relics have belonged? This is the province of our illustrious Pliny to decide, of him to whom is known the whole surprising volume of nature's grand productions. This day the observation at noon gave for our latitude 26 degrees 21 minutes. Our longitude was the meridian of Fort Dauphin. 30th August. Our latitude this day was 25 degrees 12 minutes north, our longitude that of the Caicos. At 6 in the evening a gale sprang up. During the calm a flock of birds, frigates, gulls, larry, and boobies availed themselves of the pursuit on the part of dorados and bonitos of the flying fish to make them in turn their prey. The sea was beaten and covered for the space of a league by the flying fish, alternately in the air and the sea, by the bonitos who pursued them, and the winged tribes which caught these latter from the surface. Who has ever seen the king hunting in the plains of Coisi, Montrouge or Saint-Denis, here game enclosed is driven from all quarters as into an enclosure. The hunt is a hunt no longer, but the field of sport a slaughter-house. Such was the hunt of the dorados and birds. The aspect of heaven was through the whole night frightful. Here dingy clouds, there grey, were furrowed by incessant flashes of vivid lightning, the wind southeast, our course southwest by west. 31st August. This day we were unable to take an observation, the sky still overcast, the wind less strong, after passing to the south, again veered to the east. An unfortunate swell from the north had prevented our enjoying rest or comfort, whether by day or night, for 4 preceding days. 1st September. This day at noon we found ourselves in latitude 25 degrees 24 minutes. The wind, constantly east-southeast, seemed regular and continuous. We hoped to see Maria Juana, as otherwise Maguana, but not succeeding in our expectations laid to, for fear of running on the shallows. Some few drops of rain fell this day. 2nd September. This morning we proceeded on our course at 5 o'clock, and at 6 hoisted our square sail, or sail of fortune, steering west-southwest to make the land. At length, at 8 o'clock, we perceived to windward some extremely low lands, bounded by reefs, on which the surges breaking rose to upwards of 20 feet. These at least we computed, as at 4 leagues off the breakers resembled the lateen sails of fishermen. We thought these islands the Caicos, and flattered ourselves with reaching the Cape next day. The land, however, turned out to be Morguana, as was verified notwithstanding the different opinion of the pilot and captain, our joint observation showing the latitude 22 degrees 20 minutes, the exact latitude of Morguana. So many errors on the part of our conductors encouraged me to offer advice. I recommended the captain to run on opposite tacks in order to reach the enaguas to windward, seeing we were steering direct upon them. He heeded me not, but laid to. What was the consequence? At 8 in the morning we saw little enagua. It was mistaken for the Caicos, and we did not change our course. At noon, land, land was called out. Some said it was Tortuga, some said the main. Neither were in the right. It was Greater Enagua, along which we were obliged to coast from east to west the whole afternoon, in order to double it to leeward, with the disadvantage of a wind in opposition to the currents. In coasting along Greater Enagua, entirely surrounded by shoals, while from 3 to 4 leagues from shore, we saw bottom ahead. Terror now was general, and the clamor usual on similar occasions with Spaniards served only to increase the alarm. Scarcely had we time to tack about. This would indeed have been a wreck in port, and thanks to the drunkenness and inexperience of our pilot, who, notwithstanding, reckoned himself a very clever fellow, we were in this instance placed in greater danger than we had experienced before throughout the whole 3 months of our voyage. 4th September. The wind blowing strong from the northeast, we kept under sail all night, and in the morning, by 10, got sight of the headlands of Santo Domingo. At noon I recognized Point Jean Horbal and Cape Fou to the southward. I was exceedingly affected, for I had reckoned on reaching the Cape that day, which it now was impossible we should do while the wind blew from the quarter it did. The vexation prevented my eating any dinner. The captain, noticing this, inquired the cause with much solicitude and kindness. I seized the opportunity presented to me by this question to entreat him to land me at St. Nicholas Mole, offering to pay all the charges of anchorage and port dues his compliance might occasion. He was grieved even to tears at the thought. He said that the moment was at hand when we must separate. "What," observed I, "did you then imagine we were never to part?" Have we not through the whole course of life constantly before us examples of separations in all men from every object of their fondest attachment, separations which every one of them but precursors of others? Do we not see that nothing is durable, nothing stable? Alas, my friend, this is an established law to which of necessity we must submit, either with good will or perforce. You have been kind to me in extreme. The task your generous heart prescribed has been most amply accomplished. Would to heaven I were able to render you still more essential services. Yes, my future talk shall be to show my gratitude by every possible means." The captain listened to reason, and readily agreed to steer for the mole, though still in melancholy mood. Soon, however, the pleasure of being on land earlier than he expected, and of not having to buffet with the waves for 2 or 3 days longer, which possibly it would take him to reach the Cape, in case the wind should not become more favorable, unruffled his brow, and we entered the Bay of the Mole, each alike gay and cheerful. As for me, I was so pleasingly surprised to see myself on Santo Domingo that I rubbed my eyes and dreaded to wake from a dream. My first care was to wait upon Monsieur de la Valtiere, the king's lieutenant, at St. Nicholas Mole. I informed him who I was, and what the object of the voyage I had undertaken. He loaded me with kindness, sought how to render me service by every means, and punished according to their merits some sailors who had given me cause of complaint. I had here also the good fortune of forming an acquaintance with Messieurs d'Anteville and Dumanoir of the engineer service, who showed me the greatest civility. I now wrote to the intendant of the colony, but burning with impatience to reach Port-au-Prince without waiting his answer, I availed myself of the offer of Monsieur de Vassal to repair thither in a king's galley which he commanded. We sailed on the 17th September, and on the 25th arrived at Port-au-Prince. The intendant gave me a most kind and gracious reception. He ordered payment of the 2,000 livres due to me, according to the direction of the minister, and moreover gave me an appointment under himself with 1,000 crowns a year. The pleasure I felt at seeing my friends again, the fatigue I endured on my voyage, the change of air and diet all combined, occasioned me a sickness of more than 6 weeks' duration. As soon as I recovered, I wrote to my parents and friends. I forwarded a relation of my voyage to the minister, and dispatched the first specimens of the plants I had brought from Mexico for the king's garden. But all these were lost with Captain Gillet on his return from the Cape, whither he had come in the postilion of Rochelle with the first intelligence of an embargo. My Spanish captain, from whom I thoughtlessly separated myself at the Mole while he was careening his boat without taking leave, revenged himself of my incivility in a manner highly honorable to himself, by sending me back a bill for $54, which I sent him before my departure, that is to say, 14 to repay advances he had made me, and 40 which I held it my duty to pay him for my passage. I much regretted, and still remember with the liveliest affection, this excellent and obliging young man, whom I never can think of without inquietude, as since our parting I have not once heard from him, notwithstanding his promise of corresponding with me. May I never hear but good news of this youth, to whom I was indebted for my return, however accompanied, as it happened to be, with tedious toil and danger. I did not enjoy the sweet arising from the success of my expedition without some bitter mingled in the cup. I had effected a matter of public utility, and could but become a butt for the arrows of envy. Still, the shaft which struck the deepest and caused the greatest pain was an insinuation attributed to have been circulated by the Spanish captain, by a man so truly my friend, that I had stolen my cochineal. It was, however, impossible that any such like charge could have been made by the captain, for separate from his being most affectionately attached to me, I never had told him so, but on the contrary, as was the truth, that I had bought them at 4 different places in Mexico, and I have such opinion of his honor as to be secure he could as little be guilty of falsehood as of calumny. If it be said, however, that the captain might have committed such a double outrage for his own defense, and in order to disculpate himself in the eyes of the Spanish nation for being an accomplice in carrying off the prize, I must answer that while at the Cape he could not have been in a predicament requiring such procedure, nor even if he were in his own country do I believe that any charge on such account could be alleged against him, since, however severe the laws which prohibit the exportation of dry cochineal, there are none which forbid the transport of it alive. There is not, therefore, the slightest likelihood that this dart was lanced by the captain. No, it was the poisoned javelin of a secret enemy, some foe to my tranquillity, or rather of some infamous miscreants, who look on all that is meritorious only with invidious eyes. And after all, can it be imagined, if it had been impossible for me to have purchased this precious insect, an insect I was so anxious to naturalize in our country, that I should endure the abortion of my project on account of a false and ridiculous delicacy? Most assuredly I should not, any more than a savage coming to France in search of grain with which to enrich the land of his birth. After such an avowal, doubtless my testimony will admit of credit, but more may be said. Have I at any time passed with any one for a fool or an idiot? And should I deserve to be esteemed other in stealing a matter, precious certainly in my eyes, but which might be obtained for a mere trifle, and in thus exposing myself to the attacks, the mortification, the obloquy, which must naturally follow? In fact, what at the first custom-house could I have answered, on being interrogated, how I had got this production? A lie in such case would not have been less dangerous than a confession hurtful. I should have been exposed to the loss of the whole fruit of my travels, and in the eyes of Spaniards have incurred an opprobrium more painful to me than death. I think I do not deceive myself with respect to right and wrong. To have stolen the cochineal would, in my opinion, have been an act of social injustice, as far as regards the cultivator whose garden I might have despoiled, an injustice which I sought to avoid, and I think successfully, for by buying it I only committed a wrong against the nation from whom I bore it away. Now, in my position, I regarded myself as the prototype of a different nation, on whom nature has bestowed the same prerogatives, the same right to her favors, and if, after offering payment for the cochineal at whatever price might have been imposed, all the Indians to whom I might have applied had combined to refuse my request, I should then have considered myself, as in case of war, absolved from the restrictions of social laws. But in infringing them, in carrying away by stratagem what had been denied to entreaty, I would have compensated the individual towards whom I might be guilty of a real injury, and have covered with piastres the ground from which I bore off my prize. From the sentiments which thus with the utmost sincerity I have exposed, let it be judged if I have aught wherewith to reproach myself. Were I to decide, from my heart should I gain acquittal, but on a subject so delicate, and involving myself, I must leave with others to decide. End of section 22. End of Travels to Oaxaca by Nicolas-Joseph Thiéry de Menonville, an anonymous translation from the French. Read for LibriVox by Sue Anderson.